You've been burned out for longer than you care to admit. They told you rest is just a weekend away, that healing comes from bubble baths, vacations, or finally finishing your to-do list. But if that were true, why do you still feel so tired, even after sleeping? Why does your chest feel heavy for no reason? Why does joy feel like something distant, like a memory from another life? Here's the truth. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're emotionally exhausted. And what you need isn't more doing. It's unlearning. It's undoing. It's peace, no performance. And Buddhism holds the map. For thousands of years, Buddhist wisdom has healed the tired, the restless, the overwhelmed, not with fake positivity, not with toxic hustle, but with truth, with stillness, with deep soul-level restoration. Tonight, as you listen to these teachings, something in you will start to let go. The noise will quiet, the pressure will soften, and your nervous system, the one that's been stuck in fight or flight, will finally start to exhale. This isn't just another bedtime audio. This is sacred space, a reset for your heart, a homecoming for your spirit. Are you ready to come back to yourself? Let's begin. You've been holding on longer than you should have, smiling when it hurts, saying, "I'm fine," when your soul feels like it's unraveling, trying to keep up, to be okay, to stay strong even when everything inside you whispers, "Please stop." You didn't notice it at first. The slow drain, a little tired, a little impatient, a little less joy. But over time, it built up, like carrying a backpack of invisible weight every single day. And now, even resting feels like effort. But what if the heaviness you feel isn't a flaw in you but a signal? What if burnout isn't just about doing too much, but about carrying what was never yours to hold in the first place? There's a reason Buddhist teachings begin with the mind. Because healing doesn't start with fixing the outside world. It begins by understanding what blocks your peace from within. Buddhism calls them the 5 hindrances, not sins, not flaws, just obstacles, mental habits that quietly wear you down. They don't scream, they whisper. They convince you to chase, to resist, to avoid, to spin in circles, and to doubt everything, including yourself. And most people don't even notice them, but they're there, tugging at your energy, keeping your nervous system stuck in loops, making you feel like no amount of sleep, silence, or space is ever enough. The first one is sensual desire. It's not just about lust or pleasure, it's about craving. Craving for anything that promises escape: food, noise, social media, online shopping, even constant productivity. Your body may be still, but your mind keeps reaching, grabbing for the next thing to make the moment feel better. And in that grasping, you lose your center. You tell yourself, just one more scroll, one more snack, one more email, one more win. But the relief never lasts. It fades as quickly as it came, leaving behind a deeper emptiness than before. It's not the craving that's the problem, it's believing the craving will heal you. The Buddha never said desire is evil. He said it's unsatisfying, temporary highs, temporary comfort, but never true peace. Because peace doesn't come from getting more, it comes from needing less, from seeing that the urge to consume is often a distraction from something you don't want to feel. And when you meet the craving with mindfulness, when you pause and breathe instead of grabbing, you start to notice you are not your wanting, you are not your urges. And every time you choose stillness over escape, something in you starts to heal. Then comes ill will, that sharp tension that lives under your chest. It doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it's impatience, irritation, judgment, coldness. That silent clench of the jaw when someone interrupts your peace. It makes you tired, but in a different way, because carrying resentment is like trying to walk through life with clenched fists. You use up all your energy just holding on, and over time, it eats at you. Bitterness doesn't just live in the mind, it shows up in your body. Your shoulders tighten, your gut churns, your breath gets shallow, you feel wired but also weighed down. You start snapping at people you love or shutting down altogether. And underneath it all is pain-old, unprocessed hurt, disguised as control. Buddhism doesn't ask you to deny your anger. It asks you to see through it. Because anger always has a story. And that story is often, I was hurt. I wasn't seen. I felt powerless. When you meet ill will with compassion, not just toward others, but toward yourself, its grip loosens. You begin to soften. Not because you've given up, but because you've chosen freedom over rage. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means not letting it burn your energy from the inside anymore. Then there's sloth, not laziness, not weakness, but the heaviness that makes it hard to get up, even when you want to. The fog that wraps around your mind. The feeling that nothing matters, so why bother? It's one of the least understood forms of burnout. Because from the outside people say, just push through. But sloth isn't about effort. It's about depletion. It shows up when your system is overwhelmed, when your mind has been fighting so many battles in silence that it just shuts down. You stop caring. You lose your spark. Even joy feels like too much work. And then the guilt comes, the shame. You tell yourself you're lazy, useless, broken. But what if sloth isn't your enemy but your body's cry for silence? For rest without guilt, for space without stimulation. In Buddhism, sloth is gently met with mindfulness and curiosity. Not force, not pressure, but small awakenings. One breath, one step, one gentle invitation to aliveness. And over time the fog begins to lift, not because you forced yourself out of it, but because you gave yourself permission to rest in it, to listen to what your soul needed instead of pushing it to perform. The fourth hindrance is restlessness, that constant spin, the overthinking, the tight loop of thoughts that won't shut off even when you're exhausted. Your body is tired, but your mind is racing. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? What if I never get better? Restlessness is the nervous system's response to unsafety. When life feels uncertain, the mind tries to control it with thoughts. It thinks, if I just analyze enough, I'll stay ahead of the pain. But all it does is drain you. Because thinking is not the same as healing, and planning is not the same as peace. Restlessness often hides underneath achievement, multitasking, even perfectionism. You stay busy so you don't have to feel, but deep down you're tired of running. So what helps? Stillness, not forced, but kind. Meditation helps. Not to stop thoughts, but to notice them without grabbing them. To see that thoughts are just weather. They come, they go. And underneath them is a sky that has always been calm. When you stop chasing clarity and sit with what is, restlessness fades. Not all at once, but slowly. Because when you stop resisting the moment, the mind stops fighting it. And in that space, your energy returns. Then there's doubt. Not the thoughtful kind. The kind that paralyzes. That keeps you stuck in a loop of, should I? Shouldn't I? The kind that makes you question your path, your worth, your strength. You start second-guessing everything. You try something, then stop halfway. You make a plan, then rewrite it 100 times. You don't trust yourself anymore. And that breaks something inside. Because when you can't believe in your own voice, the world feels louder, scarier, more overwhelming. Doubt creates internal friction. You spend all your energy debating instead of doing. It doesn't protect you, it drains you. And Buddhism sees this clearly. Doubt isn't solved by more thinking. It's softened through confidence in practice, through remembering, I've survived before. I've healed before. I've figured things out before. Faith not in an outcome, but in the path. Doubt whispers, what if I can't do this? Mindfulness replies, Let's just take the next step. And every time you return to presence, you weaken doubt's grip. You don't need all the answers. You just need to stay, to breathe, to trust the small steps. The 5 hindrances aren't punishments. They're just pattern zones that keep you in survival mode. They make your days feel harder than they need to be. They tell you that peace is impossible, that you're not doing enough, that you're falling behind. But when you meet each one with awareness, with patience, with Buddhist wisdom, you take your power back. Not by forcing yourself to be better, but by noticing what's getting in the way of who you already are. Burnout doesn't start with work. It starts with disconnection from your breath, from your truth, from the quiet space inside you that just wants to be held. And that space isn't gone. It's just been covered by craving, by resistance, by fatigue, by noise, by fear. Tonight, you get to return to it, slowly, gently, without judgment. You're not here to fix yourself. You're here to remember yourself. And now that you've seen what's been draining you, we can begin the healing. There is more to learn, more to soften, more to let go. So take a breath. You're doing beautifully. The path is already unfolding beneath your feet. Let's keep walking. You've started to see it now, the quiet ways your mind blocks peace, the craving, the tension, the fatigue, the racing thoughts, the doubts. You've looked them in the eye, felt their grip, and something in you has begun to loosen. You're not as stuck as you thought, but insight is only the first layer. What heals you is how you relate to yourself in the aftermath. Because after all the effort to survive, what you need most now is warmth, not from the world, but from within. A nervous system that's been in fight, flight, or freeze for too long doesn't just need rest. It needs safety, and nothing creates safety in the body like loving kindness. Loving kindness, or metta, is not just a nice feeling. It's not positive thinking. It's a disciplined practice. A rewiring of how you relate to your pain, your body, your past, and the world. It teaches the nervous system what it forgot. That you are not your mistakes, you are not your thoughts, you are not beyond healing. Emotional exhaustion, at its core, comes from fighting life, trying to be better, faster, stronger, calmer, more perfect. It's like swimming against the current. Metta teaches you how to float. Burnout builds from years of harshness. The way you talk to yourself when you're tired, the way you measure your worth through productivity, the pressure to always be useful. These aren't just thoughts, they are nervous system signals. They tell your body over and over, you are only safe if you're achieving. And so, rest feels unsafe. Stillness feels like failure. Self-care feels like guilt. Until you bring in metta. Metta changes the script. It starts with one phrase, repeated silently. May I be happy, may I be safe, may I be at ease. It sounds simple, even silly, but the body listens. Your heart listens, especially if you've never spoken to yourself with kindness before. At first, it may feel empty. Your mind might resist. You'll think, this is stupid, this won't work. That's expected. When you've spent years in self-judgment, kindness feels unfamiliar, but repetition rewires the mind. The phrases act like gentle footsteps, carving new paths in the brain. With time, the messages sink deeper, not because you're forcing it, but because your body starts to believe, maybe I don't have to fight so hard to be worthy. Metta helps heal emotional trauma by replacing the inner critic with an inner caregiver. You don't just observe your pain, you sit with it like a friend. You send warmth to your anxiety instead of pushing it away. You send love to the tightness in your chest instead of ignoring it. You say, may I be gentle with this, and suddenly the tension doesn't need to shout anymore. That small shift-off meeting, pain with compassion signals to the nervous system, you're not in danger, you're allowed to rest now. Chronic stress keeps the body hypervigilant. You're always bracing. Even when nothing is wrong, your system is on edge. That's why exhaustion doesn't always come from doing too much. It comes from never being able to relax fully. Metta lowers the baseline. It teaches the system to feel safe again, not through control, but through unconditional warmth. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of you responsible for recovery. Breath slows. Muscles loosen. Heart rate steadies. But it only happens when the inner dialogue shifts. Metta gives that dialogue new language. What makes metta different from other healing methods is that it doesn't require fixing. You don't have to be free from anxiety to deserve love. You don't have to be healed to send yourself peace. That's the power of unconditional kindness. It's not earned. It's offered, again and again, until the walls come down, until love feels less like a performance and more like a return. This practice doesn't just help when you're meditating. Over time, it becomes how you relate to the world. You begin to speak more gently to others, not because you're trying to be nice, but because your nervous system no longer sees threat in everything. The more metta you offer yourself, the less reactive you become. You find that criticism doesn't sting as much, that rejection doesn't unravel you, that failure doesn't define you. You've created a home inside yourself that no one can take away. Metta isn't passive. It's not about avoiding conflict or pretending things are okay. It's fierce. It means choosing love even when your trauma screams. It means staying soft when your past tells you to shut down. It means sitting with the part of you that's ashamed, not to fix it, but to be with it. And something powerful happens when pain is witnessed without judgment. It starts to let go. Practicing metta daily builds emotional resilience, because the more you return to kindness, the less power your triggers have. You start to notice the moment you begin spiraling, and instead of following the spiral, you pause, you breathe, you offer yourself a silent, "May I feel safe in this moment?" And often, that's enough to shift the course. The storm might still come, but you're no longer pulled under. That's the difference between surviving and healing. Metta also has a profound effect on stored emotion. Emotional burnout isn't just mental, it lives in the body. Muscles hold on to memories. The heart holds on to grief. Metta allows you to meet these stored emotions, not with fear, but with care. You scan your body, you notice where it aches, and you send that spot attention, breath, kindness, no analysis. No story, just presence. And as you keep showing up for these places, something begins to open. What was frozen starts to thaw. What was locked away begins to surface and leave. In clinical research, loving kindness meditation has been shown to increase serotonin, reduce cortisol, improve sleep, and even build empathy pathways in the brain. But more than that, it teaches you how to be human without abandoning yourself. It's not a quick fix, it's not a trick, it's a reorientation of how you live in your own skin. When burnout feels like constant effort, metta gives you permission to rest into who you are, not who you think you should be. It gives the body something it rarely receives, inner approval. And that changes everything, because a system that feels accepted stops fighting itself. It starts to regulate. It starts to repair. It begins to restore balance, not by avoiding stress, but by processing it through the lens of love. This is why metta is medicine. Not metaphorically, literally. It treats the root, not the symptom. It tells the nervous system, you are safe, even in pain. You are worthy, even when tired. You are held, even when healing is slow. And when those messages land, something deep inside exhales. One of the most healing aspects of metta is that it doesn't end with you. Once you've stabilized the practice for yourself, you extend it to a loved one, to a neutral person, even to someone difficult. Not to excuse them, not to approve of their harm, but to free yourself from carrying the weight of resentment. Because metta is not about changing others, it's about not letting your own heart harden. Loving kindness is powerful not because it fixes pain, but because it allows you to meet pain without fear. And that more than anything is what heals a burnt-out body. Safety, presence, gentleness. Qualities the world rarely teaches, but that Buddhist practice brings to the center. You don't have to be perfect at metta to benefit. Even practicing for 5 minutes a day begins to create change. The key is consistency. Like water softening stone, each repetition wears down the old patterns. You go from self-criticism to self-acceptance, from panic to calm, from exhaustion to renewal, not because life stops being hard, but because your relationship with life stops being harsh. Burnout can trick you into thinking you're powerless, that the only way out is to quit everything. But healing doesn't always require escape. Sometimes it just requires a shift in how you meet yourself each day. Metta offers that shift. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, quiet, reliable. And over time, your system starts to learn. I can show up without tension. I can feel without shutting down. I can live without pushing. I can rest even when things aren't perfect. I can be here as I am and still be loved. That's the core of it. Beneath the stress, beneath the burnout, beneath the fear, a quiet voice waiting for you to listen, not demanding, not judging, just offering. A place to rest, a place to breathe, a place to return. So tonight, if the weight still feels heavy, come back to the words. May I be happy, may I be safe, may I be at ease. Say them slowly, say them gently, not to force change, but to allow space. And let that space hold you, because the most powerful medicine is the one that reminds your heart it was never unworthy to begin with, and that is where healing begins. You've begun to offer yourself kindness, not as a reward, but as a way of being. You've felt the shift, the warmth replacing tension, the stillness settling where chaos once lived. But as peace starts to grow, another layer begins to reveal itself. A voice, subtle but persistent. The one that says, "This isn't enough. You should be doing more." That pressure to perform, to prove, to stay ahead. It doesn't vanish with rest or loving kindness. It's built into the very idea of who you think you are. This identity, the overachiever, the fixer, the one who always holds it together, it runs deep. It's not just a set of habits. It's how you've defined yourself. It's how you've survived. For years, maybe decades, you've worn the mask of competence, of being strong, of staying in control, and the world has rewarded you for it. Praise, respect, achievement. But beneath it all, a cost has been growing. The cost of never feeling like enough, the cost of running on empty, the cost of confusing your worth with your output. The truth is, burnout isn't just about overwork. It's about over-identifying with the doing, with the striving, with the idea that your value depends on performance. Buddhism offers a different lens. It doesn't tell you to work harder or fix yourself. It asks something far more radical, to question the self you think you are. At the heart of Buddhist wisdom is the teaching of anatta non-self. Not to say you don't exist, but that who you think you are isn't fixed. That the identity you cling to is not your essence, but a construct. And constructs, by nature, are impermanent. The overachiever isn't who you are. It's just a role, a pattern of thoughts, emotions, behaviors conditioned over time. It arises when certain conditions are present, and it fades when those conditions change. But if you believe it's who you are, you stay locked in its grip. The overachiever identity is clever. It doesn't shout. It whispers in your choices. It's the voice that says yes when you're too tired. The one that takes on extra work to feel important. The one that can't sit still without guilt. It turns productivity into self-worth, success into safety, control into identity. But what happens when you can no longer keep up? When rest becomes necessary, when performance isn't possible, that's when the cracks show. That's when exhaustion becomes existential. Because if you're not achieving, who are you? Anatta answers with clarity. You were never those roles to begin with. The pressure you feel isn't coming from your truth, it's coming from a false attachment. A mistaken view that your value is tied to what you produce. When you see through that illusion, a different kind of freedom becomes possible. You don't have to stop caring. You don't have to abandon your ambitions. But you stop clinging. You stop letting your identity be defined by them. To experience anatta, you start by observing. Watch how your mind narrates your life. Notice how quickly it labels, I'm busy, I'm failing, I'm falling behind, I need to prove myself. Each thought reinforcing the story of the self. But when you really look, those thoughts arise and pass away. They're not solid, they're not facts, they're conditioned events, just like weather. Thoughts, sensations, reactions all coming and going. None of them are you. They happen within you, but they are not you. You are the awareness noticing them. As you practice this, something begins to shift. You stop defending the identity. You stop needing to win every argument, to be seen a certain way, to be productive every hour. You start allowing yourself to be soft, to rest, to be incomplete. And in that space, you discover a deeper truth. Your being is not tied to any of it. You are not your achievements. You are not your resume. You are not your habits. You are not even your pain. You are the open space in which all of it arises and fades. This isn't just philosophical, it's profoundly practical, because when you let go of clinging to the overachiever identity, your nervous system starts to settle. The pressure to always be more dissolves. You begin to work from inspiration, not fear. You start to create because you want to, not because you're trying to earn permission to rest. Even failure feels different. It's no longer proof of your unworthiness. It's just one part of the unfolding process. And with that shift, energy returns. Not the hyperactive energy of stress, but a grounded energy one rooted in truth, not performance. Practicing anatta doesn't mean erasing your personality. It means loosening your grip on it. You can still have preferences, goals, passions, but you hold them lightly. You stop reacting from ego. You begin responding from presence. And this changes how you relate to others too. Because the more tightly you cling to identity, the more defensive you become. You see others as threats, rivals, obstacles. But when identity softens, compassion grows. You recognize your shared humanity. You see that everyone is acting out their own conditioned stories. And instead of judging, you start to listen. In Burnout, one of the most painful aspects is isolation, not just from people but from yourself. You lose touch with who you are beneath the roles. Anatta helps you reconnect, not by finding a new label, but by stepping outside the need for labels entirely. You begin to rest in awareness. You learn to trust stillness. You discover that your deepest identity is not a role, it's the awareness that sees through roles. This practice takes time. It takes courage. It takes honesty. Because letting go of identity can feel like death, the death of who you thought you were. But in that death, something beautiful is born. Not a better version of you, a freer version, one that doesn't need to prove anything, one that doesn't need to outrun exhaustion, one that knows peace is not something you earn, it's something you remember. Burnout often reaches its peak when you've been living out of alignment with your inner truth for too long. When the persona you wear no longer fits, but you keep forcing it anyway. Non-self invites you to stop pretending, to let the mask drop, and not to be nothing but to be free from clinging to something you're not. When you release identification, you begin to feel safe in presence again. You start noticing beauty without needing to document it. You enjoy silence without needing to fill it. You relate to others without needing to impress. Life becomes less about proving and more about experiencing. That shift alone can begin to repair years of nervous system strain. There is deep rest in letting go of being someone, because trying to be someone all the time is exhausting, especially when that someone is never allowed to be tired, never allowed to fail, never allowed to just be. When you see that you're not that identity, you make space for all of you, the soft parts, the scared parts, the quiet moments, the imperfect decisions, and you realize none of it makes you less. It just makes you human. Anatta doesn't leave you empty. It leaves you open. Open to life, to truth, to simplicity. Open to acting without over-attaching. Open to caring without clinging. Open to effort without pressure. You don't need to abandon your responsibilities. You just stop using them to define yourself. You shift from, I must do this, or I'm worthless to, this is what I choose, from presence. And that shift transforms how you use your energy. From that space, even discipline feels different. It's not about chasing self-worth, it's about honoring what matters. You work, not because you're afraid of being nothing, but because your values guide you. You rest, not because you've earned it, but because your body needs it. You speak, not to impress, but to connect. Everything becomes simpler, more intentional, less reactive. And in moments of stress, when the identity flares back up, you pause, you breathe, you ask, what am I clinging to right now? And the answer is almost always a story, a self-image, a belief that you need to be more, but you don't. You just need to return to awareness, to breath, to this moment. That's where peace lives. So let it be okay to not know who you are. Let it be okay to not have a title, a plan, a polished version. You don't need to be a perfect self. You just need to be here, with honesty, with openness, with less clinging. And in that softening, the healing deepens. Because when you stop holding so tightly to who you think you're supposed to be, your nervous system finally lets go. And what remains isn't emptiness, it's space. Space to feel, space to rest, space to live. When the need to prove yourself softens, when the identity of always doing starts to dissolve, a new kind of clarity begins to rise. Not dramatic, not loud, just stillness. And in that stillness, something tender appears, awareness of how deeply disconnected you've become from your own body. How long you've ignored the signals, skipped meals, overeaten in stress, numbed emotions with sugar, caffeine, screens, and suddenly there it is. A quiet truth that can't be unseen. Healing doesn't just happen in your thoughts. It happens in your gut, your breath, your choice, especially with food. The body carries the memory of your emotional life, not just trauma, but habits, beliefs, neglect. In Buddhist practice, mindfulness isn't limited to meditation cushions and spiritual texts. It's in how you walk, speak, eat. It's in the relationship you have with your daily rituals, especially the one thing you do several times a day, whether stressed, joyful, grieving, or numb. You eat. Mindful eating is not about diets. It's not about weight. It's not about restrictions or willpower. It's about returning to relationship. Food as presence. Food as care. Food as medicine for a nervous system that's been pushed too far for too long. When you're emotionally exhausted, digestion suffers. The body redirects energy towards survival. Your gut slows down. Inflammation increases. Cortisol, the stress hormone, rises. Blood sugar spikes and crashes. The more out of sync your emotions become, the more dysregulated your system gets. You may feel anxious after meals, bloated even when you eat light, fatigued no matter how healthy your food seems. But what if the issue isn't the food, but how you're relating to it? In Buddhism, Mindfulness brings awareness to the entire process of nourishment. Not just what you eat, but how, when, and why. It teaches you to pause before reaching for the next bite. To notice the emotion behind the craving. To feel where hunger lives in the body. Is it in your stomach? Or is it tension in your chest? A void in your heart? A need to feel comfort? Food becomes not just sustenance, but a mirror. It reflects what you're running from, what you're avoiding, what you're craving emotionally but not expressing. This isn't meant to create guilt. It's meant to awaken choice. When you eat with presence, your body shifts out of fight or flight and into rest and digest. The parasympathetic nervous system turns on. Blood flows to your digestive organs. Nutrients are absorbed more efficiently. Inflammation decreases. Even your immune system strengthens. Mindful eating teaches the body, you are safe now. You can let go of the bracing. You can receive. The process begins with awareness, slowing down. Before eating, take a breath. Feel the weight of the food in your hands. Smell it. Notice your body's state. Are you rushing? Are you distracted? Are you eating out of routine or from true hunger? That one pause can shift your entire physiology. You stop the cycle of unconscious consumption and start a new pattern, being with your body, not against it. The way you chew matters. Chewing slowly signals the brain that digestion is happening. It allows saliva enzymes to begin the process gently. Rushing through meals, swallowing chunks of barely chewed food, burdens the gut and adds stress. Eating too quickly also short-circuits satisfaction. You don't give your body time to register fullness, so you eat more than you need, and afterward feel heavy emotionally and physically. Mindful eating also changes your relationship with taste. When you slow down, food becomes richer, more complex. You notice textures, layers, subtleties. Meals turn into meditations. Each bite becomes a moment of connection. And connection is what restores you when you're burned out. Not just connection to others, but connection to your own body, to your own care, to your own enoughness. In Buddhism, food is seen as sacred not because it's fancy, but because it's life. It sustains the body that allows awakening. Monastics eat in silence. They reflect on the origin of the meal, the people who grew it, cooked it, offered it. This cultivates gratitude, not forced gratitude, but grounded appreciation. You begin to see how many hands brought nourishment to your plate. You feel less alone, you feel supported by life, and when you're emotionally fragile, that recognition matters. It builds strength not through control, but through connection. Mindful eating is also about boundaries. Emotional exhaustion often shows up as collapsing into patterns you don't want, just to soothe discomfort. You might eat late at night, snack to avoid anxiety, drink coffee to push through fatigue. These aren't failures, they're signals. Signals that the deeper need is rest, regulation, comfort. When you meet those needs directly, you stop using food to fill what it cannot. Boundaries become easier. You start asking not, what can I eat, but what would nourish me right now? And sometimes, nourishment means stopping. Not because you're restricting, but because you're full, because you're listening. Stress-related inflammation doesn't only come from what you eat, it comes from how you feel while eating. Guilt, anxiety, shame, they are all inflammatory. They disrupt digestion. They create chemical cascades in your bloodstream. They make your body feel like it's under threat. Even healthy eating becomes unhealthy when it's driven by fear. Mindful eating is different. It's not about perfect choices. It's about a relaxed state. That relaxed state heals. You start to notice patterns. Maybe you crave sugar when you're overwhelmed. Maybe you skip meals when you're anxious. Maybe you graze all day to avoid stillness. These are not random. They are strategies your body has learned to cope. And mindfulness doesn't judge them, it studies them. It brings curiosity instead of shame. and curiosity creates space for change. Regulating adrenal overload begins with stabilizing blood sugar, calming the gut, reducing cortisol. All of these are directly influenced by how and when you eat. Irregular eating spikes stress hormones. Late-night meals disrupt sleep. Overconsumption of stimulants keeps your system in overdrive. But instead of forcing discipline, Buddhist practice brings compassionate structure. Regular mealtimes, balanced portions, gentle awareness, and most importantly, permission. Permission to eat, permission to rest, permission to slow down. Many people eat while scrolling, working, watching TV, or even walking. The body eats, but the mind doesn't register the experience. The nervous system doesn't receive the signal of nourishment. You stay hungry not just for food, but for presence. Mindful eating reunites those two. It tells your body, you are here, and this moment matters. This practice becomes even more important in emotional recovery. When your energy is low, your gut is sensitive. Foods that never used to affect you may now cause bloating, pain, fatigue. Mindfulness helps you observe not reactively, but gently. You begin to notice how different foods make you feel, not based on trends, but based on truth. You learn to trust your body's signals. And the more you trust, the less overwhelmed you feel. That trust is what rebuilds your inner safety. Because a body that's listened to begins to cooperate. It softens, it restores. In Buddhist tradition, the goal is not to suppress desire, but to transform relationship. Eating is no exception. You're not trying to eliminate craving. You're learning to sit with it, feel it, understand it. Sometimes the craving leads to food. Sometimes it leads to tears. Sometimes it leads to breath. Either way, you meet it with awareness. And that awareness is what untangles the old wiring of urgency, of guilt, of mindless habits. There's also healing in simplicity, in slowing down to prepare a meal, in choosing whole foods when possible, in giving thanks, in chewing slowly, in stopping when full. These are small acts, but together, they create a rhythm. And rhythm restores nervous systems. It gives your body something predictable, grounded, reliable. And that, when everything else feels chaotic, is a gift beyond measure. You may notice that when you eat mindfully, your entire day shifts. You make better decisions, you speak more calmly, you feel more stable. That's because nourishment affects neurotransmitters, hormones, energy levels. It affects how you think, how you feel, how you connect. Food isn't just fuel, it's a conversation with your cells. A message of safety or stress. Mindfulness ensures that the message is healing. As this becomes a way of life, you stop fearing food. You stop using it to punish or reward. It stops being a war zone. It becomes sacred again. Not because of what's on the plate, but because of how you show up to it. With presence, with gratitude, with care. And slowly, as the inflammation fades, as digestion improves, as energy returns, you begin to trust your body again. You begin to feel at home in yourself. Not by following rules, but by rebuilding relationship. That is the power of mindful eating. It doesn't just nourish your stomach, it nourishes your life. So the next time you eat, treat it as practice, as prayer, as peace, not perfect, just present. Because every bite you take with awareness is a step toward healing. Not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, spiritually. Healing that doesn't come from effort, but from attention. You're not broken, you're rebuilding, one mindful moment at a time. As you begin to slow down, as your body starts to listen, another kind of tension reveals itself, one that doesn't live in muscles or digestion, but deep in the mind. The kind that wakes you at night with a racing heart. The kind that whispers, "What if?" every time you try to rest. The kind that makes even peace feel unfamiliar. It's the background noise of anxiety, the kind born not just from fear, but from the need for everything to make sense, to be secure, to stay in place. And it's this very need that keeps you exhausted. Beneath the surface of burnout is the craving for control. The belief that life must follow a plan, that outcomes must be predictable, that identity must be stable. You chase routines, expectations, roles, and when life doesn't cooperate, when things shift or fall apart, the structure you clung to cracks. That crack is where anxiety enters, not because things are broken, but because your mind cannot accept change without resistance. Buddhist philosophy offers a way through this, not by fixing or rearranging what's broken, but by seeing that the structure itself was never permanent. The core teaching is shunyata, emptiness. Not emptiness as void or absence, but as openness, as fluidity, as the natural state of all things. Nothing has an independent, fixed essence. Everything depends on causes, conditions, and relationships. Nothing stays the same. Nothing is isolated. And while that may sound unsettling at first, it is the very insight that loosens the grip of anxiety. Anxiety thrives on rigidity, on the belief that things must be a certain way in order for you to feel okay. When that belief is exposed, when you realize that nothing can ever be held in place permanently, not thoughts, not roles, not people, not even your idea of yourself, something unexpected happens. Instead of panic, there's space. Space to breathe, space to let go, space to stop fighting reality. This shift doesn't numb you, it frees you, because when you stop expecting life to behave according to fixed structures, you stop blaming yourself every time things change. You stop panicking when plans fall through. You stop exhausting yourself trying to keep everything stable. You begin to move with life, not against it. Burnout often comes from this subtle resistance, trying to make impermanent things stay permanent. Jobs change, people evolve, bodies age, identities shift. But when your sense of self is attached to these things, every change feels like a threat. You try to hold tighter, you overcommit, you overperform. You suppress uncertainty with busy schedules and high standards. But the uncertainty remains, and your energy drains trying to manage it. Shunyata teaches a different response. It doesn't ask you to abandon life. It asks you to meet life without expecting it to remain fixed. That doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become more responsive, less reactive, more flexible, less controlling. You begin to see that everything you once clung to, your identity, your role, your goals, are not solid. They're temporary forms. They arise and pass, just like thoughts, just like emotions, just like seasons. Understanding this intellectually is one thing. Living it is another. It begins with awareness, with watching how your mind reacts when things shift. Do you tighten when plans change? Do you feel unsafe when something is unclear? Do you find yourself rehearsing the future to avoid discomfort? Each of these habits is built on the illusion of solidity. Shunyata breaks that illusion not to leave you lost, but to help you return to flow. Anxiety often comes from the mind treating thoughts as facts. But thoughts, like all phenomena, are empty. They have no inherent power. They pass through. They arise due to conditions and dissolve when those conditions fade. When you stop identifying with every thought, every belief, every fear, you give the mind room to rest. You stop defending an imagined version of yourself and start relating to what's here now. Shunyata also applies to emotions. Emotions are not enemies, they are movements. They surge and fade. No emotion stays. But when you cling to identity, I am anxious, I am broken, you freeze the emotion into something solid. And that solidity becomes heavy. You resist it, you suppress it, you judge it. But when you see the emotion as an empty, even happening, passing, not defining, you respond with less fear. You say, "This is arising now, but it is not me. It will move." This insight dissolves shame. Shame tells you that your burnout is a personal failure, that your anxiety means something is wrong with you. But when you understand emptiness, you realize that your current state is just the result of countless conditions, not a permanent defect. You begin to treat yourself with more compassion, not as a broken version of some ideal, but as someone meeting changing conditions with awareness. This shift also changes how you relate to others. Often, interpersonal anxiety is rooted in expectations. You expect people to act a certain way, to meet certain needs, to never change. But people are also empty of fixed identity. They shift, evolve, contradict themselves. And when you stop expecting permanence in others, your relationships soften. You stop over-controlling. You stop over-apologizing. You allow people to be dynamic, and in doing so, you release the anxiety of having to manage their reactions. Even your stories about your past begin to loosen. You stop defining yourself by old wounds, old roles, old mistakes. You see that those experiences happened, but they are not you. They were conditioned moments. You can learn from them, hold them gently, and let them be part of a much bigger, unfolding truth. Not a single event can define a being that is constantly changing. This doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it sacred. Because when you stop seeking permanence, you start appreciating the moment. You savor a conversation because you know it won't happen again in the same way. You pause for breath because you no longer assume there will always be time later. You live with more awareness, not because of fear, but because of presence. In Buddhist meditation, emptiness isn't just a concept, it's an experience. As you sit and observe, thoughts become less personal. Sensations become less reactive. You begin to experience spaciousness, not the absence of experience, but the absence of clinging. And that space is deeply restorative. It's the opposite of burnout. It's the place where energy is not wasted, defending, grasping, controlling. It's the place where being is enough. You may notice that as you practice this, your nervous system starts to uncoil. The constant need to fix everything fades. You become more comfortable with not knowing. You stop chasing certainty. And in that letting go, you reclaim your strength, not the brittle kind that resists, but the resilient kind that bends without breaking. Even in moments of stress, the insight of emptiness can ground you. You can pause and ask, what story am I clinging to? What fear am I treating as truth? What role am I defending? And as you examine those attachments, they start to dissolve. You're left not with confusion, but with openness. And in that openness, new choices arise. You're no longer reacting from old scripts. You're responding from awareness. Shunyata is not about disconnection. It's about seeing the interconnectedness of all things. You see that your burnout isn't isolated. It's woven from societal pressures, personal history, collective fear, biological rhythms. Nothing exists on its own. And that insight brings humility. It helps you forgive yourself. It helps you let go of blame. And it helps you begin again, without the weight of who you think you're supposed to be. Burnout often feels like being stuck in a small, tight room with no exit. Emptiness reveals that the walls were never real. They were made of expectations, assumptions, identities. And when those dissolve, the space opens. You can breathe again. You can move again. You can live again. So let your grip soften. Let your definitions loosen. Let your story rest. The more you empty, the more you discover. Not nothingness, but freedom. Not absence, but peace. Not void, but clarity. There's nothing missing from you. There's just too much holding on. And now, you're learning to let go, to rest in what's here, to meet each moment without armor. And in that meeting, something deeper awakens. Something that was never burned out, never anxious, never rigid. Something that's been waiting quiet, spacious, kind. Letting go has already started to reveal what doesn't need to be carried. You've seen how clinging to certainty, identity, and performance holds your anxiety in place. You've tasted what it's like to soften your grip and allow openness. But there's another layer, quieter, older, deeper, one you rarely notice because it's always filled with notifications, with voices, with planning, with opinions. Even healing can become noisy. Even self-awareness can turn into another inner conversation. And this constant stimulation is not neutral. It's draining you, not because the world is loud, but because silence has become rare. Silence isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of clarity. In Buddhist practice, noble silence is not just about being quiet. It's about choosing to stop all unnecessary speech, both external and internal, so the mind has a chance to reset itself. This kind of silence is not passive, it's restorative. It's structured stillness, designed to release you from the mental overload that modern life normalizes. When you're burned out, your mind doesn't stop because you want it to. It keeps spinning because it has never been trained to pause. Information keeps pouring in long after your system has reached its capacity. You keep listening, talking, replying, consuming. Even in moments that look like rest, your attention is still active, scanning, anticipating, interpreting. Noble silence cuts through all of this, not by removing stimulation completely, but by creating a clear boundary that allows the nervous system to finally stop performing. Mental fatigue builds slowly, not just from overwork, but from the subtle demand to constantly process words, reactions, headlines, background noise. And your brain, like any other part of the body, needs recovery time. When it doesn't get it, your thoughts become cloudy, memory weakens, emotions become reactive. You start to lose patience. You misread signals. You interpret neutral events as threats. The mind gets stuck in loops because it hasn't had time to breathe. Silence is the breath the mind needs. It's the space where overstimulation unwinds. But to access that space, it has to be chosen. In Buddhism, noble silence is practiced with intention. It's not simply avoiding conversation. It's the deliberate pausing of verbal and mental engagement. No small talk, no commentary, no storytelling. Even inner dialogue begins to fade. What's left is presence without response. You hear, but you don't reply. You think, but you don't follow the thought. You notice, but you don't narrate. This opens a completely different state of awareness. When you stop filling silence, your system starts to regulate on its own. Heart rate slows, cortisol lowers. The vagus nerve, responsible for rest and digestion, activates. Decision fatigue decreases because you're no longer constantly generating input. Mental tension, which thrives on constant interpretation, starts to unravel. In this space, clarity returns not as something to reach for, but as something that was waiting beneath the noise. Structured silence is powerful because it removes the need to perform. You're no longer curating your words or managing responses. You're not adjusting your tone or crafting a reply in your head. This creates an immediate release of pressure. Your nervous system, which has been tracking the social environment for cues and threats, gets a break from scanning. You stop over-explaining. You stop reacting. You stop trying to be understood. And in that pause, you begin to understand yourself more clearly. Practicing noble silence doesn't require retreat centers or monasteries. It begins with small, intentional periods where you commit to no speech, no media, no engagement. It can be 1 hour, 1 meal, 1 morning. The key is that it's not just quiet, it's complete. No texting, no writing, no consuming content. It's not about isolation. It's about emptying the channels that constantly demand attention. As you practice, you'll notice discomfort. The silence may feel loud at first. Your mind might try to fill it with planning, reviewing, worrying. This is normal. It's the mind detoxing from overuse. Let the thoughts rise and pass without holding them. Don't try to suppress the noise, just stop feeding it. Every time you return to the silence, the noise loses its grip. Every time you choose stillness, the fatigue starts to lift. Structured silence also helps regulate emotional intensity. When you're constantly reacting, there's no time to metabolize what you're feeling. Emotions pile up. Irritation masks sadness. Fatigue hides behind anxiety. Silence gives them space to be felt and released without explanation. You don't need to name every feeling. You just need to stop distracting yourself from them. The body knows how to process what's real when it's no longer overloaded. One of the most misunderstood aspects of silence is that it's boring. But that boredom is actually a gateway. Underneath boredom is your nervous system recalibrating to lower stimulation. What you interpret as emptiness is actually balance returning. You're not losing engagement, you're gaining depth. Your senses become sharper. You begin to hear subtle sounds. Feel your breath more fully. Notice the tension leaving your shoulders. Awareness deepens without effort. Noble silence also allows space between stimulus and response. This is essential for burnout recovery. Without space, you react on autopilot. You agree to things you can't handle. You speak without thinking. You scroll endlessly. But when silence becomes part of your rhythm, you create space to choose. That space gives you power. It helps you stop the spiral before it starts. It gives you the moment to pause before saying yes out of guilt or fear. It gives you the clarity to say no without apology. Silence builds trust in yourself. Because when you stop reaching for external input, you start hearing your own inner guidance again. You stop outsourcing clarity. You remember how to listen inward. This strengthens your intuition. You start to know when you're overwhelmed, when you're aligned, when you're pretending. That knowing isn't found in advice or noise, it's found in quiet. The practice also creates boundaries without confrontation. You don't need to argue your way into peace. You simply stop engaging where it drains you. Silence becomes your sanctuary, your protection. You don't need to explain your burnout to everyone. You don't need to justify your exhaustion. You step back, you close your mouth, you rest. And in that rest, healing happens. As your nervous system learns this rhythm, silence becomes less of a discipline and more of a refuge. You begin to look forward to it. It becomes a daily return, a moment to reconnect to what's real. You notice how much you speak without intention, how often you fill space because it feels awkward not to. And in noticing, you become more mindful with your words. You speak only when needed. You pause often. You allow space in conversation. This changes how you communicate. It creates less conflict, more clarity, more calm. In Buddhist monastic life, noble silence is not a punishment, it's protection. It protects the mind from distraction. It protects the speech from harm. It protects the energy from scattering. This protection becomes essential when you're healing from emotional exhaustion. You need time away from noise, time away from performance, time away from fixing. Just space. Just being. You can practice noble silence during mundane activities, eating, walking, sitting. The point isn't what you're doing, but how you're doing it, with presence, with stillness, without commentary. And as the silence deepens, you'll notice the difference between quiet and stillness. Quiet is the absence of noise. Stillness is the absence of resistance. Stillness is where you stop struggling to be somewhere else. You stop resisting the moment. You land. This landing doesn't need to feel profound. Sometimes it's just a single breath where you didn't rush. A moment where you didn't need to respond. A walk where you didn't think about anything. That's the medicine. It doesn't heal you through intensity. It heals you through spaciousness, through subtraction, through stopping. Structured silence doesn't solve all problems, but it gives the mind room to see them differently. Without panic, without urgency, you begin to notice patterns you couldn't see before. You recognize how often you give your attention to what drains you. You learn where your boundaries need reinforcement, and you make choices from alignment, not exhaustion. The more you practice, the more silence begins to move with you. You carry it into your life, into the moments of chaos, into the meetings, the commutes, the tension, not as a withdrawal, but as an anchor, a center, a quiet confidence that doesn't need to speak to know its truth. This kind of silence doesn't isolate you. It reconnects you to your body, to your clarity, to the part of you that's never been burned out, just buried. Beneath all the noise, beneath all the doing, there is a stillness that has never been touched by fatigue. Noble silence is the doorway back to that stillness. So, when the world feels loud again, when your thoughts race, when burnout starts to creep back, remember the silence, not as something you visit once, but as something you return to again and again. A reset, a refuge, a rhythm. Let the world be loud, let your thoughts be wild. You don't have to chase them. You have silence now. You have space. Silence creates space. Space reveals patterns. And when those patterns become visible, the question naturally follows: where did all this begin? The exhaustion, the constant effort, the drive to keep going, even when the body says, stop. You can trace it back through schedules, habits, responsibilities, but deeper than that, it lives in the choices repeated over time, not always conscious, not always recent, but woven into your rhythm like a thread that never breaks. The body holds the tension, the mind holds the story, and underneath both is something even older: karma. Karma means action, not just physical actions, but the energy behind them, the intentions, the tendencies, the inner push that becomes outer behavior. Karma isn't punishment, it's pattern. When an action is repeated with strong intention, it leaves a groove. That groove becomes your default reaction. Give too much? Numb your needs? Avoid boundaries? These aren't random behaviors. They're karmic, groove-shaped by repetition, reinforced by habit, often invisible until you stop. Burnout doesn't appear overnight. It's built over time through energetic imbalance, giving when you're empty, saying yes when you mean no, silencing your own needs because others seem more important. It feels noble at first, selfless, generous, but generosity without wisdom leads to depletion. In Buddhism, wise action is not just about doing good, it's about sustainability. If your kindness leads to collapse, it's not aligned karma, it's karmic debt. Energetic debt forms when your actions cost more than your system can afford, like withdrawing from a bank account with no deposits. Every time you override your body's signals to meet someone else's expectations, you take out another loan. Every time you betray your boundaries to avoid guilt, you go deeper into deficit. And even though the world may praise you for your selflessness, your body keeps the balance sheet, one that eventually shows up as fatigue, resentment, illness, or emotional shutdown. This cycle is not always conscious. It can be inherited, learned from family, modeled through culture, passed down through beliefs that say worth is tied to usefulness, that love must be earned, that rest must be justified. These are karmic imprints, not destiny, but conditioning. And conditioning can be changed, but only through awareness. Only when you stop performing long enough to see what you're actually repeating. Karma is not just about what you do, it's about what you allow. Letting someone cross your boundaries repeatedly is an action. Ignoring your intuition is an action. Staying silent when your truth wants to be spoken is an action, and each one carries energy, not moral judgment, but momentum. That momentum builds until your life reflects it, until your outer reality starts mirroring the patterns you never paused to examine. Breaking this cycle doesn't begin with effort. It begins with stillness. That's why noble silence comes first. In silence, you see where your energy goes. You notice the urges that drive you to fix, to please, to help without limit. And in that seeing, choice returns. You begin to ask new questions. Who am I doing this for? What am I hoping to receive? What am I avoiding by giving so much? Sometimes the giving is a mask, a way to feel needed, a way to avoid facing emptiness, a way to feel in control. Buddhism doesn't shame these patterns, it reveals them. It teaches that awareness dissolves unconscious karma. Once seen clearly, the action changes. You begin to give from fullness, not deficit. You begin to serve without sacrificing your center. This shift starts with recognition. You track where your energy goes, who drains you, what habits deplete you, where you override your inner no. Then you pause, not to fix, but to feel. To feel the toll of decades of unbalanced giving, to feel the grief of not protecting your own needs. That grief is not weakness, it's honesty, and honesty is the first step to freedom. Energetic debt also shows up as identity. You believe you are the helper, the one who holds everything, the strong one. That identity becomes heavy. It doesn't allow you to fall apart. It doesn't allow you to say, I can't do this right now. And so you keep going. You give past the point of health. You smile through burnout. You say yes through tears. But inside, the weight keeps growing, until silence makes space, until stillness lets the weight speak. Buddhist practice invites balance through wise action. That means not just acting from compassion, but from clarity. Compassion without boundaries is not sustainable. Clarity shows you when to step in and when to step back, when to offer and when to rest, when to listen and when to let go. This balance is what dissolves karmic patterns. You stop reacting. You start responding. You don't need to be everything for everyone. You need to be aligned with what your body and heart can carry with integrity. Energetic restoration also means learning to receive. Many people trapped in burnout don't know how to be supported. They're uncomfortable resting. They feel guilt when not doing. That guilt is karmic residue. It can only be cleared by consciously choosing to stop, to receive without debt, to rest without explanation, to let others hold you, not as a transaction, but as a healing act. Restoration doesn't mean becoming passive, it means acting from wisdom. A rested body can give without collapsing. A regulated nervous system can support others without losing itself. But this requires new karmic patterns. You have to create new grooves, saying no without guilt, asking for help without apology, slowing down even when no one else is. One of the most powerful tools in Buddhist tradition for shifting karma is intention. Every action begins with intention. If your intention is rooted in fear, the action carries stress. If your intention is rooted in self-awareness, the action carries peace. Setting intention before acting changes the karmic result. You ask yourself, is this action aligned with truth? Does it honor my body? Am I acting from love or fear of rejection? These questions bring you back to center. You also begin to notice the results of past actions with compassion, not as self-blame, but as understanding. You trace your exhaustion to patterns of pleasing, perfectionism, over-responsibility. You acknowledge the pain they caused, not just for you, but for others. Because overgiving often robs others of their own power. Your karmic healing becomes theirs too. When you step out of old roles, others are forced to meet life differently. That's how cycles change. This is not a call to selfishness. It's a return to right relationship. With yourself, with energy, with time, with truth. Buddhism teaches the middle path, not indulgence, not self-denial, just balance. Karma becomes balanced when actions are rooted in awareness. You give because it feels aligned, not because it buys approval. You stop when your system says stop, not when collapse forces you. You speak truth even if it disappoints someone, because the truth is the cleanest energy there is. Breaking karmic cycles of burnout also means rewriting your internal stories. Stories like, I must always be strong. My needs don't matter. If I rest, I'm lazy. These stories aren't facts. They're conditioned responses, and they can be unlearned. Every time you choose presence over performance, rest over reaction, truth over image, you create new karma, new possibilities, new energy. This work is subtle. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. With each small shift, the system rebalances. Fatigue starts to ease. You no longer feel haunted by the past. You begin to trust the body again, trust your timing, trust your enoughness. Not because you're trying, but because you're no longer draining energy on proving, fixing, controlling. And that's where freedom begins. Not in becoming someone new, but in remembering what was always there when you stopped giving it all away. You don't need to keep earning rest. You don't need to justify your needs. You've paid more than enough. Now is the time to stop the cycle. Now is the time to restore. Let the karmic debts dissolve not through effort, but through awareness. Not through more giving, but through deeper presence. Life doesn't need you exhausted. It needs you clear, whole, honest, alive. Awareness is now unfolding where effort used to live. You're learning that burnout isn't just about doing too much. It's about how and why you give your energy in the first place. When karmic patterns of over-responsibility are exposed and released, something quieter emerges. But even in that stillness, there's another layer on that pulls and pushes with every outcome, every emotion, every reaction. It's not just the doing that drains you, it's the emotional ride underneath it. The constant swinging between wanting and fearing. And this is where the 8 worldly winds take hold. In Buddhist teaching, the 8 worldly winds are the shifting forces that influence nearly every choice, reaction, and emotional state. Gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, pleasure and pain. These pairs seem natural, even unavoidable, but when they take root in the heart, they create cycles of hope and fear that leave you emotionally unstable and deeply exhausted. It begins with gain. The thrill of achieving, of acquiring, of finally having something to show for your effort. Gain creates a high, a rush, but it also creates attachment. You fear losing what you've gained, so you work harder, strive more, protect what you've collected, whether it's success, recognition, or emotional validation. And when gain is your focus, the mind becomes restless. It starts to measure every moment based on what it can add. This chase is endless, because gain never feels final. It only creates more desire, more striving, more anxiety. Then there's loss, inevitable, yet always unwelcome. Loss strips you of what you worked for, what you thought defined you, what you assumed would last. And the emotional energy required to resist loss is immense. You grieve, yes, but often it's not grief alone. It's fear, shame, identity collapse. You internalize loss as failure. You take on guilt that was never yours, and instead of letting go, you hold tighter to whatever is left. This tension eats your energy from the inside out. You become exhausted not just by what you lost, but by the need to hold on. Praise seems harmless. It lifts you up, confirms your effort, validates your value. But the danger of praise is how easily it becomes addictive. You begin to crave it. You align your choices with what will keep the approval coming. You measure your worth by the reaction of others. Praise can trap you in roles that no longer serve you, because stepping out of them might mean losing the applause. And when that happens, you begin to live for others' comfort, not your own truth. Emotional exhaustion builds in this performance, slowly, steadily, until even praise starts to feel hollow. Blame, on the other hand, cuts deep. It turns quickly into self-judgment. You internalize every criticism, even the unfair ones. You overanalyze, over-apologize, over-correct. You try to prove you're not what they said you were. This leads to emotional overwork, the kind that comes from constantly trying to redeem yourself. And the irony is, the more you carry the burden of blame, the more reactive you become. Your energy gets spent on defending, explaining, fixing. Instead of letting others hold their projections, you take them on. And with each act of self-protection, the fatigue grows. Fame doesn't just mean public recognition. It's the desire to be seen, admired, chosen. In small ways or big ones, you seek to be important, to matter, to be noticed. And again, the pursuit itself isn't wrong, but when it becomes a source of identity, your energy gets tied to the spotlight. You become anxious about being forgotten. You say yes to things that burn you out just to stay relevant. You start living as a version of yourself that's more palatable, more impressive, and deep down, you begin to feel fake. The effort to maintain the image becomes unsustainable. Then comes disrepute, the fear of rejection, of not being enough, of being misunderstood, disliked, dismissed. You react to it by shrinking or by performing even harder. You over-explain to avoid being misjudged. You stay silent to avoid disapproval. You begin to distrust your own voice. And when disrepute lands, even unintentionally, it feels like an earthquake. Your emotional foundation shakes because your sense of worth was too dependent on being liked. The fear of disrepute locks you in constant self-monitoring, draining your peace moment by moment. Pleasure pulls like a magnet, a moment of ease, a sense of reward. But it can also become a trap when your nervous system starts depending on it to feel okay. You push yourself harder, telling yourself the next break, the next indulgence will make it all worth it. But when pleasure is used as a bandage, it never satisfies. You become restless between hits of comfort. You crave more, yet feel less. The body feels good temporarily, but the burnout remains. Because pleasure cannot repair what presence has abandoned, and pain the one you work hardest to avoid. Physical, emotional, mental discomfort. You numb it, resist it, judge it, but pain grows when denied. It spreads through tension, through exhaustion, through quiet resentment. When your life becomes shaped around avoiding pain, you lose access to freedom. Your decisions shrink, your options narrow. You settle, you endure, and even when the pain is gone, your body keeps bracing for it. That constant guarding is what creates a baseline of chronic stress. It's not the pain itself, it's the war against it. The 8 worldly winds aren't wrong. They are part of being human. But when they control you, when your emotional balance depends on chasing the positive and avoiding the negative, they become the roots of exhaustion. Your nervous system becomes trapped in a loop of reactivity. One praise and you're up, one critique and you're crushed, one success and you're flying, one failure and you're falling. There is no steady ground, no inner refuge. Buddhist wisdom doesn't teach you to ignore these winds. It teaches you to observe them without being carried away. It teaches you to anchor in what doesn't move. When you see the 8 winds clearly, you stop living for outcomes. You stop tying your energy to how things go. You act from presence, not pressure. You speak truth without waiting for applause. You rest even if no one understands why. You hold space for loss without losing yourself. And most importantly, you stop fighting the natural rhythm of rise and fall. This practice brings balance. Emotional neutrality, not coldness, but steadiness. You begin to hold praise and blame the same way, with curiosity, not clinging. You feel gain and loss without defining yourself by either. You stop proving, comparing, fearing. Your energy, once scattered by extremes, returns to center. Burnout recovery requires this stability, because no amount of rest will last. If your emotions are still ruled by winds you don't see, you'll rest for a day and get thrown off by one harsh comment. You'll meditate all morning and unravel after one setback. Real peace means not being tossed around. It means finding shelter in your own awareness. The 8 worldly winds are subtle. They sneak into daily thoughts, choices, conversations. They become so familiar you don't question them. But every time you pause to notice their pull, you weaken their grip. Every time you act without chasing reward or fearing rejection, you create new freedom. And that freedom is what repairs the nervous system. Not just rest, but inner safety. Freedom from the winds doesn't mean indifference. It means maturity, wisdom, a kind of internal weatherproofing. Life still moves, feelings still arise, but you're no longer driven by reaction. You respond with clarity. You move with intention. You speak with groundedness. And that groundedness is what protects your energy. Letting go of the winds also means letting go of roles. You stop needing to be the achiever, the fixer, the one who always knows what to say. You let people misunderstand you sometimes. You let yourself be human. You trust that what matters most can't be taken by gain or loss, by fame or failure. It lives deeper than that, in presence, in wisdom, in stillness. So when you feel yourself riding the highs or crashing in the lows, pause, breathe, ask, am I being moved by a wind? And if the answer is yes, that's not a failure, it's a chance to return, to center, to clarity. You don't have to fix it, you just have to see it. Because once seen, the winds start to settle, the mind stops chasing, the body stops bracing, and the exhaustion begins to lift, not because the world has changed, but because you have. When the winds stop tossing you around, something strange happens. Stillness doesn't feel empty, it feels like truth. You see how much of your exhaustion came not from the actual tasks, but from being pulled in every direction emotionally, from trying to manage outcomes, impress others, protect identity. And underneath all of that, a life packed full of roles, obligations, distractions, commitments, choices, goals. Full, yet somehow never fulfilling. The noise outside mirrors the noise inside. And now comes the most unexpected teaching of all. The path to peace might not be in adding more healing, more tools, more effort, but in letting go. Not slightly, radically. In Buddhism, this is called nekama renunciation, often misunderstood as deprivation or rejection of the world. It's actually the art of releasing what no longer serves your clarity, not to punish yourself, not to prove anything, but to breathe again, to recover the energy that has been scattered across 1,000 unnecessary tasks, distractions, identities, and ambitions. Burnout thrives in complexity, when everything feels urgent, when your to-do list never ends, when your attention is split between 6 screens and 10 expectations. When your home, your phone, your calendar, your inner dialogue, everything is full. You tell yourself you need to keep up. That slowing down would mean missing out, falling behind, being forgotten. But underneath all of it is a truth your nervous system already knows. This pace is not sustainable. Radical simplification doesn't begin with cleaning out your closet or deleting apps. It begins with a deeper question: what am I holding on to that costs more than it gives? That question cuts through every area of your life. People, projects, habits, thoughts. The act of renunciation is not random, it's wise. It's seeing clearly where energy is leaking, where complexity has turned into suffering, and then letting it go, not in resentment, but in relief. In a hustle culture, this teaching is hard to digest. You're praised for being busy, valued for being productive, encouraged to optimize every moment. Rest becomes another item to schedule. Simplicity gets framed as laziness. And so you keep reaching for more knowledge, more upgrades, more achievements. But none of it lands, because peace can't exist where there is no space. Nekama is not about having less just to say you did. It's about needing less because your joy is no longer dependent on having more. It means stepping off the treadmill entirely, not to collapse, but to finally move on your own terms. It's a return to enough, to being full with what's already here. And when that happens, your system begins to rest, not because you scheduled rest, but because you stopped overloading it. One of the first areas to simplify is your digital world. Hours spent checking, replying, comparing, consuming. Every notification steals a little attention. Every feed scroll stirs emotional energy. These small fragments add up. They interrupt your focus. They stimulate without satisfying. They leave your mind buzzing long after you've put the phone down. Renunciation here doesn't mean deleting everything. It means deciding what input actually nourishes me and letting go of the rest. Mental clutter is harder to see, but just as draining. You carry old conversations in your head, unfinished worries, imaginary arguments, self-judgments on loop. These inner dialogues keep your system engaged even when your body is resting. Letting go here means noticing what loops are active and gently choosing to put them down. You can think about it later, or not at all. You don't have to finish every thought. Silence is not a failure, it's a reset. Physical clutter plays a role too, not because minimalism is a goal in itself, but because your environment reflects your mind. A space full of things you don't use creates friction, visual noise, micro-decisions. A simplified space signals safety. It tells your brain, nothing to manage here. It allows your senses to rest. It becomes easier to breathe. Social simplification is one of the most powerful forms of renunciation. There are conversations you keep having out of habit, people you stay connected to out of guilt, roles you maintain out of fear. But every interaction costs energy. When you're burned out, energy is a sacred resource. Simplifying your social world means telling the truth. You're allowed to have boundaries. You're allowed to take space. You're allowed to step away without apology. The people who matter will understand. The rest were never aligned. Even your spiritual or healing journey can become overloaded. More books, more methods, more pressure to fix. But healing doesn't need to be a full-time job. When you trust the simplicity of awareness, of silence, of presence, you stop chasing the next solution. You rest in what's already working. You stop trying to reach enlightenment by over-efforting. You return to the breath, the moment, the space between thoughts. That's enough. Saying no is a form of renunciation. So is stopping. So is resting without productivity. These are radical acts in a culture that trains you to earn your worth through exhaustion. But each time you say no to something you don't need, you say yes to something deeper, your nervous system, your clarity, your peace. Letting go also means surrendering the image of who you thought you had to be. Maybe you've outgrown certain goals, but you still chase them because they're tied to your identity. Maybe the job, the project, the routine that once made sense now feels heavy, but you keep doing it because it's what people expect. Burnout feeds on that dissonance. Renunciation invites honesty. You ask, is this aligned with who I am now? And if it's not, you give yourself permission to release it. Joy is a surprising side effect of renunciation, because when you stop being pulled in 100 directions, you get to feel what's actually here. A breeze, a conversation, a moment of laughter. You don't need a perfect life to feel good. You just need space to feel it all. And the more space you make, the more joy finds you, not in grand gestures, but in small, real moments that were always there, hidden under the clutter. This practice also strengthens resilience. Because you're no longer distracted, no longer chasing the next fix. When life shifts as it always does, you don't collapse. You've simplified to what's essential. You're not holding more than you need. You can adapt. You can breathe. You're not attached to excess, so you don't fall apart when it's gone. Letting go is not a one-time event. It's a way of living, a rhythm. You check in often. What am I holding now that no longer fits? You get comfortable releasing. You trust that when space is created, wisdom fills it. Not because you forced it, but because space is clarity's natural companion. Renunciation also softens comparison. When you're not trying to match everyone else's pace, you stop judging yourself by their lives. You don't need their success to feel valuable. You don't need their validation to feel seen. You come back to your lane, your rhythm, your needs, and that return is a deep, unshakable peace. Burnout tells you to keep pushing. That rest will come later. That one more achievement will finally bring ease. But ease doesn't come from more. It comes from less, from choosing enough, from no longer building your life on the edge of depletion. This doesn't mean withdrawal. It doesn't mean giving up ambition or joy. It means refining. Choosing only what supports your nervous system, your purpose, your health. It means living from center, not from noise. You act from intention, not pressure. You engage from presence, not performance. Simplicity becomes a sanctuary. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't fear empty space. You don't chase stimulation to avoid discomfort. You stay with what is. You allow things to unfold. And in that space, the body heals, the mind softens, the heart rests. You begin to notice that the more you release, the more aligned your life becomes. The right people stay, the meaningful tasks remain, the real priorities rise. Everything else fades not because you forced it, but because you made room for what matters. This is the heart of Nekama, letting go not to lose, but to return, to clarity, to enoughness, to energy that no longer leaks but flows. This is not escape, this is not avoidance. This is wisdom in action. This is how burnout ends not with one more breakthrough, but with one honest breath and a willingness to live more lightly. Letting go begins to reshape everything. You've started releasing what doesn't serve your roles, habits, noise, even parts of yourself you once thought were essential. The pressure to keep up has started to quiet. Space has returned. But there's one attachment that's harder to see, and even harder to loosen. It's not just what you do, it's who you think you are because of what you do. That hidden bond between identity and effort, between self and output. Even when your calendar is empty, the urge to prove your value still lingers. And that's where burnout hides next, not in the task list, but in the illusion of self. In Buddhist teaching, this illusion is understood through the 5 aggregates form: sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Together, these are called skandhas. They are not things, but processes, layers of experience that give rise to the feeling of I. And it's this sense of a fixed, solid self that keeps you tangled in cycles of stress, striving, and exhaustion. You mistake what arises in experience for who you are. You identify with the contents of your mind, your body, your reactions. And in doing so, you take everything personally, defend things that don't need defending, and carry responsibilities that don't belong to you. The first aggregate is form your physical body, the material world, everything seen, touched, and held. You begin here because it's the most obvious. You mistake the body for the self. You measure your worth by how much your body can produce. You push it past its limits to meet demands. When the body gets tired, you don't listen. You push harder. You see pain as weakness, rest as guilt, appearance as value. And slowly, you start treating your body not as a home, but as a tool. Burnout thrives in this disconnection. It turns your body into a machine and your needs into interruptions. But form is not you. It is a condition, a process, changing every day. It doesn't belong to you. You borrow it for this life. You can care for it, nurture it, but it cannot define you. When you stop identifying with the body as your worth, you start caring for it from love, not control. You begin to listen, to honor its signals, to let it rest without earning that rest. And that shift is healing. The second aggregate is sensation, the feeling tone that arises with every experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. You touch something warm, you feel comfort, you hear sharp words, you feel tension. Sensations come quickly and shape your reactions. Without awareness, you start chasing pleasant sensations and resisting unpleasant ones. This becomes a trap. You eat to feel better, scroll to avoid boredom, work to escape discomfort. You end up reacting to the feeling instead of responding to the moment. Burnout deepens when sensations go unnoticed. You keep overriding discomfort for the sake of performance. You stay in situations that feel wrong because you ignore the subtle signals in your gut, your chest, your breath. Mindfulness of sensation allows you to pause, to notice when your system says no, to stop before collapse. When you see that sensations are just passing experiences, not facts, not commands, you stop living on autopilot. You choose more wisely. You rest when needed. You don't chase or avoid. You allow. The third aggregate is perception, the mind's labeling process. It takes in sensory input and names. This is good, this is bad, this is safe, this is dangerous. Perception creates categories. It tells stories. It forms the background of judgment. When you see someone frown, you may perceive disapproval. When you miss a deadline, you may perceive failure. These labels become automatic. They shape how you respond. But perception is not truth. It is conditioned by your past, by memory, by bias. It filters reality, but it is not reality. In burnout, perception becomes distorted. You begin to interpret neutral situations as threats. You see requests as demands. You hear feedback as criticism. These mental shortcuts are not malicious, they are learned responses, but they use energy. They feed anxiety. They keep your nervous system on alert. When you recognize perception as just one layer, not as the final word, you create space. Space to ask, is this really what's happening? Or is this what my mind is saying? That space brings calm. It stops the spiral. It restores clarity. The fourth aggregate is mental formations. These are the patterns, thoughts, emotions, impulses that shape your choices. Formations include beliefs, habits, drives, moods. They are not random. They're shaped by past experiences, cultural messages, personal conditioning. You might carry a mental formation that says, I must always be productive, or I'm not allowed to fail. These unspoken programs influence your reactions to stress. They create the inner pressure that pushes you to overextend. Burnout often comes from unconscious mental formations, from believing that worth must be earned, that rest is weakness, that helping others means ignoring yourself. You don't question these thoughts because they feel like truth. But when you start observing them, really seeing them, you realize they are just patterns, not facts, not you. And when you name them, you loosen their grip. You say, there's the thought again, the one that says I have to fix everything. And then you breathe. You don't follow. You don't resist. You just see. That seeing changes everything. The fifth aggregate is consciousness, the bare awareness that experiences everything else, not thoughts or emotions, but the knowing of them. This is the most subtle layer. Consciousness is not a self. It is not separate. It is the light by which all other aggregates are known. But when you mistake consciousness for identity, you cling to experience. You think, I am my awareness. But even that awareness arises due to causes and conditions. It too is a process. Burnout occurs when consciousness becomes entangled in everything it observes. You become the exhaustion, the stress, the identity of the helper, the achiever, the one who keeps it all together. But when you sit in stillness, when you see that awareness is not the same as what it knows, you gain distance. You can witness without becoming. You can feel pain without drowning in it. You can notice fatigue without building an identity around it. These 5 aggregates don't bind you unless you cling to them. They are not problems, they are the structure of experience. But when you mistake them for who you are, you suffer. You try to fix what's always changing. You try to control what's not yours. You defend what doesn't need defending. You burn out from holding what isn't solid. Disentangling identity from work starts here, with seeing that the self you're protecting, the one who must succeed, must be useful, must prove their worth, is built from these aggregates. A process, not a person, a temporary configuration, not a truth. And when you loosen your grip, you stop performing, you start living, you meet each moment freshly, without the pressure of being someone, without the weight of the role, without the fear of being wrong. You begin to engage with your work differently, not as a definition of self, but as an expression of presence. You do what's needed, and then you let go. You no longer tie your value to outcomes. You stop taking things personally. You rest when rest is needed. You walk away when the cost is too high. You allow success without attachment. You face failure without collapse. This freedom is not abstract. It's deeply embodied. It means your breath softens, your mind quiets, your choices become lighter. You're no longer caught in every thought or driven by every impulse. You act, but you're not bound. You respond, but you're not consumed. You remain clear. The aggregates keep shifting. That won't change. Thoughts will come. Feelings will rise. Bodies will tire. Perceptions will label. Formations will pull. But consciousness remains, watching, not clinging. And in that space, burnout ends, not by force, but by insight. This is not escape. It's awakening. The end of identity as exhaustion, the beginning of living as freedom. When you stop clinging to the parts you once believed were you, something subtle but life-changing takes shape. The pressure to maintain an identity softens. You begin to notice the space between the roles, the moments that don't need performance. And in that space, clarity grows. But even with this insight, something continues pulling you back into movement, into doing, into achieving, into fixing. It doesn't always come from fear or pressure. Sometimes it feels like survival, sometimes like duty, other times like habit. You think you've let go, but you're back in motion again, and again, and again. This is where we look deeper, not at tasks or expectations, but at the very structure of the cycle itself. Buddhism calls it samsara, not just a concept, but a lived loop of suffering. Not just about rebirth, but the repeated patterns of mind that trap you in struggle. And burnout, when seen through this lens, isn't simply about exhaustion. It's about entrapment. The mind caught in a loop it doesn't know how to exit. Burnout is often mistaken for a modern issue caused by fast-paced life. But it's older than technology, older than the office, older than capitalism. The core of burnout is the same pattern samsara has always described. Doing to become, becoming to feel whole, grasping for meaning, resisting discomfort, and repeating. This cycle continues because of craving. Craving to succeed, to be seen, to feel secure, to avoid pain, to be free of emptiness. But craving always leads back to suffering. Not because desire is wrong, but because it never stays satisfied. When craving is unmet, you keep moving. You try harder. You adjust, optimize, upgrade. You make plans, chase new goals, tweak your habits, but the rest never arrives. The peace always seems slightly out of reach, and when the craving is met, it doesn't last. The joy fades, the satisfaction dissolves. So you set new goals, search again, expect more, and the loop continues not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're caught in the mechanism of becoming. Chronic doing is the fuel of samsara, not activity itself, but the compulsive belief that something needs to happen for you to be okay. You don't just do tasks, you attach your worth to finishing them. You don't just help others, you depend on their approval. You don't just solve problems, you believe the next solution will finally bring ease. And each time you complete something, you feel a moment of relief, followed quickly by the next tension. The pause never lasts. Because it wasn't real peace. It was temporary escape. Escaping samsara doesn't mean leaving the world or abandoning your responsibilities. It means no longer being owned by them. It means acting without becoming entangled, doing without seeking identity through it, living without making your inner peace conditional on outcomes. This is not passive. It's clear. It's powerful. It's where energy stops being drained by reactivity and starts flowing through presence. To see burnout as samsara is to recognize the wheel, the turning that never ends unless you step back. That stepping back starts with awareness. You watch how your day unfolds. You feel the pull to check, to answer, to solve, to prove. You notice the internal push, I must, I should, I need to. And in that noticing, you pause. You ask, what is this moment trying to turn me into? Because every action, every thought, is part of the looper, the exit from it. The exit is not dramatic. It's often silent. It's the breath you take instead of the email you rush to write, the walk you choose instead of one more meeting, the truth you speak instead of performing, the willingness to be nobody for a moment and letting that be enough. These choices are not about stopping life. They are about seeing clearly. When the loop is seen, it loosens. Buddhist teachings describe samsara as not just endless, but exhausting. It's exhausting because it is rooted in misunderstanding. The misunderstanding that doing leads to being, that effort leads to freedom, that becoming leads to peace. And this misunderstanding isn't fixed by more discipline or better routines. It is only undone by insight. Insight into the futility of chasing what cannot fulfill. Burnout grows when you believe rest is a reward, not a right. When you see pause as weakness, not wisdom. When the voice inside only values you when you are producing. These are samsaric voices shaped by conditioning, echoed by culture, rarely questioned. But once questioned, they lose power. You begin to ask, if nothing changes today, can I still feel whole? If the answer is no, you are in the loop. If the answer becomes yes, even for one moment, you have tasted freedom. This doesn't mean abandoning your goals or passions. It means no longer binding your sense of self to them. You show up, but you stop clinging. You do your best, but you stop identifying. You rest, not because it's earned, but because it's natural. This shift transforms not just your nervous system, but your entire way of being. It turns your energy from reactive to rooted. The cycle of chronic doing often begins early. From childhood, you learn that value comes from what you achieve. That love is conditional. That stillness is lazy. So you keep moving. You build a life on effort. You climb ladders. You collect praise. You chase purpose. And beneath it all, the fear remains. What if I stop and it all falls apart? This fear is the gate of samsara. And facing it is the beginning of freedom. Freedom starts when you sit in stillness and realize nothing is falling apart. You're still here. You're not disappearing. You're not failing. You're resting. You're noticing. You're remembering that you exist without needing to perform. This realization isn't intellectual, it's felt in the body. The unclenching, the sigh, the release. That moment is outside the loop. That's where healing happens. The Buddha taught that samsara continues through ignoranceanot, seeing the nature of experience clearly. Burnout too continues through a kind of blindness. You keep repeating behaviors without seeing their cost. You keep running toward ideals without noticing the damage. But when the light of awareness touches those patterns, they shift. Not because you force them, but because they no longer make sense. You start to live differently. Not because of rules, but because the taste of clarity is better than the high of accomplishment. You start to prioritize peace over productivity, not by withdrawing, but by choosing wisely. You stop saying yes to things that steal your stillness. You let go of roles that no longer align. You slow down not to escape, but to inhabit life more fully. This life is not meant to be burned through, it's meant to be felt, lived, met with presence. Samsara wants speed. Awakening asks for attention. And in that attention, you find all the things burnout promised, but never delivered: contentment, connection, and the deep, steady joy of simply being. Let this be the moment you stop circling the same path. Let this be the pause that changes the rhythm. Let the cycle rest. You are already whole. Nothing more needs to be done. Once you begin to see burnout not just as exhaustion but as part of a deeper loop of becoming, a samsaric pattern driven by craving and unconscious repetition, the impulse to constantly perform starts to unravel. But as the loop loosens, another question rises: what now? What does it mean to engage with life in a way that doesn't lead you back into the same cycle? If doing too much creates suffering, is all effort the problem, or is it something else? The truth is, effort itself is not the enemy. It's the kind of effort, the intention behind it, the direction it takes, the energy it consumes that matters. And this is where the Buddhist path offers something rare: not escape from effort, but a wiser way to move. The path of right effort. Right effort is not about passivity. It's not about giving up or doing less for the sake of doing less. It's a complete reframing of what effort actually means. It shifts you from toxic productivity driven by fear, urgency, and identity to sustainable presence, rooted in clarity and compassion. The difference is subtle, but life-changing. Because effort without wisdom depletes you. Effort with awareness supports you. Toxic productivity often disguises itself as discipline. It rewards overwork and celebrates exhaustion. You're told to push through, to hustle, to sacrifice rest for results. It doesn't care what's driving you, only what you produce. And if you burn out, there's always more coffee, more tips, more pressure to optimize. This kind of effort might look effective on the outside, but on the inside, it erodes your well-being. You stop listening to your body, you override your emotions, you become more machine than human, and eventually, the system collapses. Right effort begins with intention. It asks you to pause before action, to ask, why am I doing this? What's fueling this choice? Is it clarity or fear? Is it compassion or pressure? The Eightfold Path places effort not at the beginning, but in the middle after right view and right intention. This order matters. You don't act first, you see first. You understand what's true, then align your effort to that truth. The Buddha described right effort as fourfold: preventing unwholesome states, abandoning unwholesome states already arisen, cultivating wholesome states, and maintaining them once they arise. It's simple, but deep. First, you protect your mind. You stop feeding patterns that harm you, like self-criticism, comparison, anxiety about outcomes. This is not suppression, it's care. You watch the thought arise, and instead of engaging, you let it pass. You don't energize it, you redirect gently. Then you release what has already taken root, the inner dialogue that says you're not enough, the old stories that push you to prove your value. You bring awareness to these states not to fight them, but to understand them. When you see clearly, they lose power. They fade not because you force them out, but because you no longer believe them. Next, you cultivate what's beneficial. Peace, clarity, kindness. These don't arise through force. They arise through small, intentional choices. A moment of pause, a mindful breath, a boundary honored, a task done with presence instead of urgency. You train your energy to move in a direction that nourishes you. And lastly, you protect those states. You recognize when peace is present, and you guard it. You don't invite chaos back in for the sake of productivity. This is effort as care, effort as wisdom. Not push, but precision. Not striving, but choosing. You stop reacting, you begin responding. This reframing also transforms how you measure success. In toxic productivity, success is output, quantity, speed. In right effort, success is presence, alignment, sustainability. You ask not, how much did I do? But was it aligned? Did it support my well-being and the well-being of others? You begin to notice how different kinds of effort feel in the body. Toxic effort tightens your chest, it shortens your breath, it creates tension in the jaw, the stomach, the shoulders. It disconnects you from your senses. Right effort feels different. It's grounded, clear. It comes with breath. You're aware while you move. You're connected while you act. The task may be the same, but your relationship to it has changed. This also changes your productivity, not by doing less, but by eliminating what is unnecessary. Toxic productivity fills your schedule with tasks that maintain image, ego, obligation. Right effort removes the excess. You start doing only what's needed, what's honest, what truly supports your path. And because you're not wasting energy on performing or proving, your work becomes more focused, more meaningful. Right effort includes rest, not as something that breaks your momentum, but as part of the rhythm of wise action. Just as a seed needs both sun and soil, your system needs both movement and stillness. You don't rest only when exhausted. You rest because it maintains clarity. You don't wait until burnout forces you to stop. You pause because you're awake to what your body is saying now. This approach to effort also transforms your relationship with failure. Toxic productivity treats failure as a threat, as proof that you're not doing enough. It leads to shame, overcompensation, and more burnout. Right effort sees failure as part of learning, as something that happens when you're experimenting, growing, staying honest. You don't need to fear it, you simply adjust, return to center, continue. Right effort works with capacity. It meets you where you are. On days when your energy is low, you do less. You don't force it. You don't punish yourself. You listen. You adapt. Some days require softness, others require strength. You don't push one into the other. You move with reality. This flexibility is what makes right effort sustainable. It bends, it breathes, it lasts. This path also brings clarity to motivation. You start noticing what you're working for. Is it love, safety, approval, avoidance? When you bring attention to your motives, you begin to purify them. Not perfectly, but honestly. You no longer act out of habit alone. You pause. You ask, is this effort rooted in fear or in truth? This question cuts through illusion. It helps you redirect. It protects your energy from being used against you. Right effort is deeply compassionate. Toward others, yes, but especially toward yourself. It doesn't require perfection. It only asks for sincerity, for presence, for honesty. You don't need to be efficient. You need to be awake. Awake to what you're doing, why you're doing it, what it costs, what it gives. Burnout ends not by stopping all effort, but by shifting into the effort that aligns with your values and your inner truth. It's not that you do nothing, it's that you stop doing what drags you out of integrity. You start doing only what brings you back. The result is not apathy, but clarity. You're not lazy, you're wise. You're not disconnected, you're discerning. As this becomes your way, your nervous system recalibrates. You stop running on adrenaline. You stop collapsing into recovery. You start living in balance. You have enough energy because you're no longer bleeding it into things that don't matter. You begin to trust yourself again, to move without burning, to rest without guilt, to produce without self-attack. Right effort is not a switch to flip. It's a path to walk, slowly, intentionally. You fall off, and you return. You forget, and you remember. This is how the path works. It doesn't demand perfection, it invites practice. Each step forward is a healing. So when the pull to push returns, and it will pause. Ask if it's truth or pressure. Ask if it's love or fear. Ask if it will nourish or drain. And let that guide you. You don't need to do everything. You only need to do what aligns with your deepest clarity. Once you begin to move with intention rather than pressure, something else becomes visible, the subtle exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from caring too much without direction. You may have shifted your productivity into alignment, but if you're still giving from a place that forgets your own limits, the burnout continues. It doesn't come from action alone. It comes from overextension, from giving without boundary, from compassion that turns into depletion. And this is where effort transforms into something deeper, not just wise, but loving. And not just loving, but sustainable. It is here that we meet the complexity of compassion fatigue and the ancient promise of the Bodhisattva. In Buddhist tradition, the Bodhisattva is the one who vows to awaken not just for their own liberation, but for the freedom of all beings. This is a vow rooted in deep compassion. It calls you to serve, to support, to carry others through suffering without clinging to your own escape. It is noble. It is powerful. And yet, when misunderstood or taken literally without wisdom, it can create suffering of its own. Because compassion, without boundaries or balance, can become self-erasure. Compassion fatigue isn't weakness. It's not a sign that you're failing at being kind. It's a sign that your nervous system is overwhelmed by sustained exposure to pain without enough recovery, support, or internal clarity. You may begin to feel detached, even numb. You might become irritable or resentful. You give, but it no longer feels like love, it feels like survival. This is common among caregivers, therapists, teachers, activists, parents, people whose lives are rooted in helping. And it is just as common among those walking spiritual paths that emphasize service without always teaching sustainability. The idea of helping all beings can feel beautiful, but without internal balance, that vision becomes a burden. You begin to feel responsible for everyone's suffering. You believe you must always be available, endlessly kind, infinitely patient. This creates an identity that's hard to live up to, one that doesn't allow for human limits, one that shames you for needing rest. Over time, your sense of compassion can become fused with obligation. Buddhism honors compassion as one of its highest values, but compassion in its fullest form, karuna, is not the same as emotional overwhelm. It is rooted in wisdom. It sees suffering clearly, but does not become consumed by it. The Bodhisattva path is not about fixing everyone's pain. It is about showing up with presence, honesty, and humility. It is about serving without losing your center. When compassion is practiced with clarity, it becomes healing. When practiced without boundaries, it becomes self-sacrifice. This is not what the Buddha intended. The middle path always honors balance. Even the most generous act must arise from an energy that is steady, not scattered. To restore this balance, you must first name where your compassion has turned into a pattern of overextending, where you're constantly giving, even when you're empty. where you're saying yes out of guilt, where you're holding space for others but ignoring your own needs. These are not signs of kindness. They are signs of disconnection from your own limits, your own body, your own center. True compassion begins with awareness. You cannot hold others if you are collapsing inside. You cannot carry others if your energy is fractured. You cannot meet suffering with steadiness if your own suffering is being buried in the process. Recognizing your limits is not selfish, it is wise. It allows your giving to be clean. It ensures your help comes from wholeness, not depletion. The Bodhisattva path, when understood correctly, does not mean self-denial. It means training in skillful compassion. It means offering presence, not solutions. It means acting with love, but not attachment. You learn to ask, is this help actually helpful? Is it wanted? Am I supporting growth or creating dependence? These questions guide you back to integrity. Compassion fatigue is not healed by more doing. It is healed by pausing, by reconnecting to your own suffering with care, by letting yourself be supported. Too often, helpers forget that they too are allowed to receive. They believe they must be the strong one, the calm one, the one who knows what to do. But strength without rest breaks, and calm without truth dissolves. Buddhism also teaches the practice of equanimity pekka, which balances compassion. Equanimity allows you to be with suffering without trying to fix it. It holds space without being swept away. It accepts what cannot be controlled. When combined with compassion, equanimity becomes the ground for sustainable care. You are not indifferent, you are centered. You act when it's needed. You rest when it's wise. One of the key misunderstandings around spiritual service is that it requires selflessness in the extreme. But in the Dhamma, selflessness means not clinging to ego, not denying your needs. It means recognizing that the boundaries between self and other are fluid, not non-existent. Caring for yourself is caring for the whole. Your well-being matters. It is not in competition with your service, it is part of your service. The Bodhisattva vow can be lived with depth and health when you understand that compassion does not mean rescuing. You are not here to solve everyone's life. You are here to be a mirror of presence, to be an example of steadiness, to act where it's wise, and to step back when it's not. Letting others experience the consequences of their actions is not cruelty, it is part of their learning. Holding everyone's pain without boundaries doesn't make you enlightened, it makes you burnt out. Skillful compassion involves choice. You choose where your energy goes. You choose who you support and when. You choose rest when needed. You let go of saving people and move toward accompanying them. You stop carrying weight that was never yours. You begin to trust that others have their own path, their own timing, their own inner wisdom. This trust is essential, because without it, your helping becomes controlling. You try to prevent suffering instead of witnessing it. You try to shape outcomes instead of meeting the moment. And every time you try to control, your compassion becomes diluted by fear. Fear that you're not doing enough. Fear that others will fall apart. Fear that your value lies in being needed. But you are not needed to save anyone. You are invited to show up honestly, to listen, to offer what's real, and to let go. Sometimes the most compassionate act is to step aside. Sometimes it's to say no. Sometimes it's to take a long walk and let the world spin without you. Not because you don't care, but because you do. In Buddhism, compassion is not just about emotion, it's about action rooted in wisdom. That means your nervous system must be part of the equation. You need to feel regulated to offer true presence. You need to be nourished to give without collapse. This is why monks and nuns live in simplicity, not to escape life, but to preserve their capacity to serve it with clarity. In your life, this might mean fewer conversations, less availability, shorter commitments, more rest, more boundaries, more silence. These are not signs of turning away. They are signs of deepening your compassion so it lasts. When compassion is rooted in truth, it sustains itself. It doesn't flare up and crash, it flows. It respects both giver and receiver. It honors space. It doesn't confuse presence with fixing. It doesn't depend on praise. It isn't afraid of discomfort. It trusts the process. Let go of the belief that your worth is tied to how much you do for others. Let go of the story that says you must always say yes. Let go of the fear that boundaries mean failure. Instead, return to the center of compassion, awareness, care, and balance. Be generous, but not at the expense of your own soul. You are not here to burn for others. You are here to light a steady flame that warms, not scorches, one that lasts, one that heals, one that invites others to do the same. When compassion becomes steady instead of sacrificial, your nervous system begins to recover. You've started to learn what it means to care without collapsing, to give without guilt, to love without losing yourself. But even when your boundaries are in place and your intentions are clear, another form of depletion can linger quietly in the background, one that doesn't come from doing too much for others, but from taking in too much from the world around you. Not through effort, but through exposure. Constant input is invisible until you try to rest. It's in the scrolling, the multitasking, the noise that follows you from room to room. It's the background hum of images, sounds, notifications, voices, opinions. And each piece of input takes something, not just your time, but your focus. Not just your attention, but your emotional stability. You may not feel overwhelmed in the moment, but by the end of the day, you can't figure out why you're so drained. You've done nothing physically exhausting yet you're spent. This is where the Buddhist teaching of Indriya Samvara, sense restraint, comes in. It's a practice rarely talked about in modern conversations, yet deeply relevant to today's overstimulated world. It isn't about suppression or avoidance. It's not about shutting your eyes to beauty or plugging your ears to sound. It's about moderation. It's about knowing the limits of your attention and understanding that the senses are gateways, not just for experience, but for energy. What you allow in through those gates can either restore you or exhaust you. Sense restraint begins with awareness. You notice how much you're actually taking in, not just what's in front of you, but how much of it you're absorbing. Your phone might be on, but are you really present? The TV might be playing in the background, but what is it doing to your mood? The podcast, the open tabs, the endless visuals, each one leaves a trace. And while your conscious mind may filter them quickly, your nervous system does not. It processes every bit, and that processing uses energy. This doesn't mean the senses are bad. Buddhism never claims that, but it does point out how unguarded senses can lead to suffering. Not because seeing or hearing is the problem, but because the mind attaches, reacts, craves, and resists in response to what comes in. One piece of news can spark a spiral. One image can trigger insecurity. One sound can bring tension. When you multiply this by the hundreds of stimuli you receive each day, the result is overstimulation. And overstimulation leads to chronic fatigue, not just physical, but emotional. Sense restraint doesn't ask you to run from the world. It asks you to be selective, to choose what your mind is exposed to with the same care you use when choosing what your body eats. You don't let just anything into your body. Why let anything into your mind? You begin by noticing your thresholds. How much sound can you take before you feel agitated? How much scrolling before you feel numb? How many conversations before your thoughts get scattered? These thresholds are not fixed. They change with your energy, your state, your capacity. Honoring them requires honesty, noticing when you've had enough and choosing to pause. Pausing can feel unnatural at first. You may be used to filling every quiet space with more input, but the silence you avoid is often where healing begins. When the senses are given rest, the system recalibrates. You begin to hear the body's signals again. You begin to notice what was drowned out by the noise, subtle emotions, intuitive guidance, unprocessed experiences waiting for space to surface. A simple act like turning off your phone an hour earlier can begin this shift. Or eating without watching something, or walking without headphones. These are not grand gestures. They are micro moments of space. And that space is what rebuilds your emotional reserve. It allows the nervous system to shift out of constant alertness into a rhythm of rest. Sense restraint is also about direction. Not just limiting input, but choosing input that aligns with peace. This is not about moral judgment. It's about energetic effect. Does this conversation leave you feeling grounded or scattered? Does this content inspire or drain? Do these sounds help your body soften or tighten? You become curious. You study cause and effect. Not to control everything, but to become skillful with what you invite in. One of the most misunderstood ideas about burnout is that it comes only from doing. But overstimulation without movement is just as draining. You can be sitting still and still be absorbing too much. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between digital stress and physical stress. It treats them similarly. Input without space leads to overload. Overload leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to tension. And tension held long enough leads to collapse. When you practice sense restraint, you begin to interrupt that progression. You create small moments of rest that prevent bigger crashes later. You don't wait until your system forces you to stop. You learn to stop before you break. You take responsibility not just for your output, but for your intake. This practice also changes your presence. When your senses are not constantly engaged, your attention becomes more available. You become more attuned to subtle changes in mood, in energy, in relationships. You start hearing what's underneath people's words. You feel more connected, not because you're taking in more, but because you're responding more consciously. Over time, your inner world becomes clearer. Not because you've added more tools, but because you've removed excess noise. You realize you don't need as much stimulation as you thought. That most of the time, simplicity holds more nourishment than novelty. You stop chasing constant input and begin valuing quiet, not as a luxury, but as a necessary part of health. This doesn't mean you withdraw from life. It means you engage with more discernment. You know when your system needs pause. You know how to close the gates when too much is coming in. You know how to redirect your senses toward what supports clarity. This is freedom not from the world, but within it. Even joyful input can be overstimulating if it's constant. Too much music, too much conversation, too many ideas can exhaust just like conflict or noise. This is why sense restraint isn't about good or bad, it's about balance. The nervous system needs contrast, activity and stillness, sound and silence, stimulation and recovery. Without that rhythm, your system cannot sustain itself. Practicing restraint does not require strict withdrawal. It begins with small acts. One moment of stillness in the middle of the day. One conversation without distraction. One evening without screens. These choices accumulate. They signal to your body that you are no longer flooding it without care, that you are listening now, that you are protecting the gates. And as those gates stabilize, so does your energy. You begin to wake up more rested. You begin to think more clearly. You become less reactive, less overwhelmed by what others say or do. Because your attention is no longer stretched thin across countless inputs, it's anchored, steady, whole. This steadiness is what helps you heal. It's not intensity that repairs burnout, it's consistency. And consistency begins with restraint, not as a punishment, but as an offering. A gift you give your nervous system every time you choose quiet over chaos. Every time you choose presence over overload. The Buddha did not teach sense restraint to separate us from joy. He taught it to protect joy from being drowned in stimulation, to protect clarity from being blurred by noise, to help us see not just the world, but ourselves more fully. So when you feel scattered, tired, reactive, pause. Ask what you've been taking in. Ask what gates were left open. Ask what can be gently closed. And let that be the practice, not escape, just balance. As your senses begin to settle and space returns to your nervous system, something deeper opens. Without the constant flood of noise and stimulation, your mind clears just enough to see what's underneath the exhaustion, not just emotional fatigue, but a fractured rhythm. Your days are scattered. Your weeks blur together. Your sleep is light. Your tasks blend into each other. Time passes, but it doesn't feel lived. And even with all the insight and intention, burnout can linger when your life has no shape to hold your healing. This is where form matters, not rigid structure, but supportive rhythm. A rhythm that reminds your body what safety feels like. A rhythm that restores not only energy, but direction. This is where the monastic tradition becomes deeply relevant. Buddhist monasteries are not just spiritual spaces, they are blueprints for balance. Every part of the day, when to rise, when to sit, when to walk, when to rest, follows a rhythm that allows the nervous system to exhale. Nothing is rushed, nothing is left to chance. Simplicity holds the entire container, and within that simplicity, the mind stabilizes, the body slows down, the heart softens. It is not the absence of work that heals. It is the presence of rhythm that carries you through the day without chaos. Modern life rarely offers this. Days are packed, even rest is fragmented. Mornings are unpredictable, meals are rushed, nights stretch longer than they should. And even with good intentions, recovery doesn't happen in a scattered life. What the monastic world teaches is that healing begins with structure, not for control, but for clarity. You create a pattern that your system can trust. You wake at the same time. You eat at the same time. You rest before depletion, not because you have to, because the body thrives on rhythm. Monastic life does not include random multitasking or constant switching between tasks. It includes one thing at a time, done with attention. A meal is a meal. A walk is a walk. A task is not layered with 3 other distractions. This way of living trains the brain to stop fragmenting. It teaches you to arrive fully where you are. When your energy is split between 5 tabs, 2 conversations, and 100 unread messages, even simple tasks drain you. But when you give one moment your full attention, you use less energy. You feel more alive. You remember what presence is. The monastic day is built around simplicity, not scarcity. Everything unnecessary is removed not because it's wrong, but because it competes with peace. There are no cluttered rooms, no buzzing alerts, no racing schedules. The simplicity is not about poverty, it's about focus. Each item, each action, each word is considered. You don't carry what you don't need, you don't keep what you don't use. This allows the mind to rest not in emptiness, but in enoughness. You can bring this into your own life without becoming a monk. You start small, wake and sleep at consistent times. Create morning and evening rituals that do not rely on stimulation. Eat without screens. Rest before you're desperate. End your day the same way you begin it, quietly, intentionally, without urgency. In monasteries, rest is not earned through exhaustion, it is built into the day. There is time for walking, for sitting, for silence. Rest is part of the rhythm, not a break from it. In burnout culture, rest is seen as recovery. But in monastic rhythm, rest is part of the design. It's expected, it's honored. This teaches your body that slowing down is not failure, it's life-sustaining. Chores are also part of the practice. Cleaning, sweeping, cooking, these are not separate from the spiritual path. They are part of it. In modern life, you may outsource these or rush through them. But when you slow down, Even the most basic tasks become grounding. Folding clothes becomes meditation. Washing dishes becomes connection. You begin to see that life does not need to be extraordinary to be meaningful. It only needs your full attention. Community also plays a role. Monks live in Sanganot in isolation. They share meals, chants, labor, but the interactions are minimal and intentional. They are not constantly social. They don't need to entertain or perform. There's presence in the togetherness. Silence is accepted. Time alone is valued. In modern burnout culture, you're often isolated by busyness or overstimulated by social pressure. What monastic life shows is that you need both solitude and gentle connection. Not endless interaction, but supportive presence. Another essential feature of monastic rhythm is cyclic activity. Days have patterns. Weeks include rituals. Seasons follow traditions. There's a cycle within a cycle. This helps the body orient. When every day is different, your system doesn't know what to expect. When you begin to create cycles, weekly rest days, monthly digital breaks, seasonal slowdowns, you anchor yourself. These are not about rigid planning. They are about knowing that rhythm is not just helpful, it's healing. In the monastery, even speech follows a rhythm. Noble silence is practiced during parts of the day. Words are used sparingly. This prevents emotional overload. It reduces mental noise. It allows the senses to recover. In your life, this might look like scheduling time without conversation, letting one day a week be quiet, allowing time after work to include space before socializing. This silence isn't avoidance, it's integration, a chance for the mind to digest. Technology also needs boundaries. In the monastery, there are no phones, no endless scrolling, no split-screen attention. While this may not be fully possible in your world, you can still apply boundaries. Decide when your day is screen-free. Choose hours without input. Let your mornings begin without a device. Let your nights end without content. Protecting your inner rhythm means protecting your attention. Monastic rhythm teaches that life is not meant to be packed. It's meant to be paced. The body has cycles. The breath has rhythms. Healing happens when life follows that natural flow. You don't need to be busy to be valuable. You don't need to fill every hour to make it meaningful. You need to create space, consistency, silence, simplicity. These are the building blocks of nervous system recovery. Even your spiritual practice can follow this design. Meditation at the same time each day. Study in small, regular sessions. Mindful movement integrated into your routine. You don't need to wait for retreat. Your life can become the retreat, not by doing less, but by doing with rhythm, by trusting the power of repetition, by knowing that peace is not found in special moments, but in patterns that support rest. Burnout thrives in disorganization. It grows in lives without structure. But not all structure is control. Some structures hold you in softness. Some create freedom, not restriction. The rhythm of monastic life is not heavy, it's light. It's not strict, it's wise. It holds you when you're tired. It reminds you what matters. It frees your mind from having to decide everything all the time. You can begin to design your life with this in mind. Map your energy. Build in recovery. Honor simplicity. Protect your rhythm. And most importantly, return again and again to the parts of the day that restore you. Let your life become a temple not of silence and stone, but of rhythm, breath and rest, not separate from the world, but wisely arranged within it. The healing is not in what you remove, but in how you reweave what stays. Even with rhythm, even with space, there are days when the heaviness doesn't lift. You've slowed down, set boundaries, honored silence, and yet something still aches. Not in your body, but deeper, a kind of tiredness that no nap resolves, a sadness that sits under the surface, even in moments of peace. This isn't a failure. It's not proof that something's wrong. It's simply the next truth that needs to be met. Suffering is part of the path, not because you're doing it wrong, but because it's how you wake up. In Buddhism, this is called dukkha, often translated as suffering, but it's broader than that. Dukkha is the sense of unsatisfactoriness that runs through ordinary experience. It's the discomfort of craving, the tension of resistance, the weariness of impermanence. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtly quiet discontent, a feeling that nothing quite fits. Burnout is one of the modern expressions of dukkha, a signal that the way you've been living is out of alignment with something deeper. Burnout is not just too much work. It's the collapse that comes when you spend your life chasing what cannot satisfy. You push for success, for approval, for peace in future outcomes. You resist rest, fear stillness, avoid grief, and all the while, the nervous system tightens. The body starts whispering. Eventually it screams. And when it does, the mind often tries to push through, to fix, to escape. But dukkha cannot be escaped. It can only be seen. And in that seeing, something begins to shift. The first noble truth is not a pessimistic statement. It's an invitation to honesty. It says, suffering exists. Stress is real. Trying to avoid it only makes it stronger. Burnout, when viewed through this lens, is not an interruption of life. It is a mirror. It shows you where you've been grasping, where you've been running, where you've been hoping something outside you will finally give you the feeling of okayness inside. And when the body collapses under that pressure, the mind finally has a chance to listen. Dukkha is not a problem to solve, it's a teacher. It says, look here, this hurts because something is off. And if you're willing to stay with it, without numbing, without analyzing it into oblivion, the suffering begins to reveal something. You see how much energy goes into being someone, how much weight you carry trying to keep things together, how deeply you fear being still, because in stillness, the ache becomes visible. This ache isn't a sign of weakness. It's the doorway to depth. The beginning of wisdom is not in feeling better, it's in understanding what hurts and why. And in that understanding, a kind of softness begins to form. You stop blaming yourself for being tired. You stop calling yourself lazy. You begin to hold your exhaustion like you would hold a friend gently, with presence, without needing to fix. Dukkha has many layers. Some are physical, some are emotional, some are existential. The kind that comes from realizing that no matter how much you do, life is still uncertain, that people change. That control is a story, that even joy fades. This isn't depressing, it's clarifying. It shows you what not to cling to. It teaches you where to stop investing your hope. Not so that you give up, but so that you can redirect your energy toward what actually sustains you. Burnout is a form of dukkha that emerges when the self you've been maintaining becomes too heavy to carry. The identity of the helper, the achiever, the always available one. These roles become masks. And the longer you wear them, the more disconnected you feel. The suffering isn't just from doing too much, it's from not being able to put the mask down. When burnout arrives, it is your life asking for truth, asking for simplicity, asking for space to let the mask fall. In meditation, you begin to watch how the mind resists discomfort. You see how quickly it jumps to distraction, how it creates stories to explain or escape pain. But the practice is to stay, not to suffer more, but to suffer consciously, to see that the pain is not personal, that it arises due to conditions, that it changes when not clung to. This is how suffering becomes insight. Insight doesn't come in one flash. It builds through repetition, through meeting the same pain again and again, until it stops feeling like a threat, until it becomes something familiar, something you no longer run from. And once you stop running, your energy begins to return, because it was never the suffering that depleted you, it was the resistance to it. When you meet dukkha with curiosity instead of fear, you begin to ask different questions. Not how do I fix this, but what is this teaching me? You begin to notice patterns, the way you rush through rest, the way you abandon yourself when others are uncomfortable, the way you postpone joy until everything is under control. These patterns are not moral failings. They are learned survival strategies. But they no longer serve you. Dukkha brings them to light so they can be released. The Buddha didn't promise a life without pain. He pointed to the possibility of liberation within the reality of pain. Burnout, then, becomes not a detour from your path, but your path itself. It strips away what's extra. It leaves only what's real. And what's real is not fragile. It's not something you need to maintain. It doesn't need constant validation. It doesn't fear quiet. It simply is. Letting dukkha guide you doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming honest. You stop pretending you're okay when you're not. You stop pushing through when what you need is to pause. You let the ache be part of the process, not as something to wallow in, but as something to walk with. You stop asking life to be painless and start asking it to be real. This shift changes how you relate to others. You become less reactive to their pain, less afraid of their discomfort. You no longer need to fix or avoid. You can sit with them as you've learned to sit with yourself. This is the heart of compassion, not sympathy, but presence, not solutions, but space. As you continue to live with dukkha as your teacher, your priorities shift. You stop seeking high peaks and start appreciating quiet ground. You stop reaching for constant stimulation and start valuing stability. You find richness in stillness, meaning in simplicity, and energy in honesty. You also begin to respect the limits of the body. Pain teaches you where your edges are. Fatigue shows you when you've crossed them. You start to listen earlier. You learn to live inside your capacity instead of always testing its edge. This isn't shrinking, it's wisdom. You begin to live from your center, not your adrenaline. There's a kind of joy that arises when suffering is met fully. Not the joy of escape, but the joy of alignment. You are no longer pretending, no longer split, no longer at war with what is. This joy is quiet, but it lasts. It doesn't rely on circumstances. It lives in truth. You realize the most transformative experiences of your life have come not from avoiding pain, but from allowing it to open you. Every moment you thought would break, you brought something unexpected, a softness, a depth, a clarity. Dukkha did not destroy you, it revealed you. So, when burnout returns, or sadness lingers, or meaning feels far away, you don't panic. You turn toward it. You sit down. You breathe. You listen. Because now you know, this is not failure. This is the next doorway. After sitting honestly with suffering, something changes. Not everything is fixed, but something essential shifts. You stop hiding from discomfort. You stop seeing it as a problem to get rid of. You begin to sense that it has something to teach. But even with this clarity, a deeper pattern can still run in the background, something quieter than pain, but just as powerful. It's not what you feel. It's what you chase. The thing that pulls you forward when the present doesn't feel like enough. The movement toward what's next. The silent urge that whispers, just a little more. This is craving. And it doesn't always look like wanting more money, food, or praise. Sometimes it shows up as the craving to feel better, to be done, to finally arrive. This craving tanha in Buddhist teaching is subtle but central. It fuels almost every form of burnout. Not the kind of craving that screams, but the kind that lingers in every unfinished moment. You feel tired, so you crave rest. You rest, and then you crave clarity. You get clarity, and then you crave momentum. It's the craving that hides inside even your healing. The craving for peace to feel permanent, for answers to stay fixed, for emotions to resolve once and for all. When you look closely, you'll see it everywhere, that tiny leaning forward, that ache to be somewhere other than where you are. Burnout doesn't come only from doing, it comes from craving, from the pressure that craving creates, from the weight of never arriving. You can stop working and still be chasing. You can lie in bed and still be running in your mind. Because craving is not about action, it's about mental motion. It's the habit of thinking life would finally be okay if only something else happened. And this is where exhaustion grows between the tension of now and the promise of later. You may crave completion, the feeling of the inbox being empty, the to-do list done, the room perfectly clean. You may crave achievement, not because it brings joy, but because you think it will finally give you permission to rest. You may crave emotional closure, a clean ending, a final answer. But craving never ends with getting. It simply shifts its target. You arrive, and the next desire is already forming. The nervous system stays on alert in this cycle. It doesn't rest because the craving says, not yet. Not until it's better, not until it's finished, not until you're different. This is why even pleasurable things lose their power to restore you. You bring craving into the rest itself. You're lying down, but your mind is already thinking about what happens after. You're meditating, but craving results. You're breathing, but craving stillness. And craving is not just for things, it's also for identity. You want to be someone who has it together, someone who's healed, someone who's grounded, calm, wise, and even that craving drains you. Because it turns your practice into performance. It turns presence into pressure. It takes something open and makes it tight. To see this clearly is not to shame yourself. It's to recognize that craving is universal. It's not a moral flaw, it's a human tendency. But when you don't see it, it drives everything. You begin each day not with spaciousness, but with hunger. The hunger for relief, for change, for resolution. And that hunger bends your decisions. It shapes your pace. It defines your inner dialogue. You might crave rest and still never feel rested, not because you didn't sleep long enough, but because you were holding the rest like a tool, using it, expecting it, depending on it to finally erase the weariness. You don't let it be what it is. You lean on it too hard, and it collapses under the weight of expectation. The same happens with achievement. You hit a goal, and instead of joy, there's a brief release, followed by emptiness. So you set another goal. Craving becomes the thread that keeps pulling you forward, but never lets you land. You build a life that looks successful, yet still feels hollow. You do what you thought would help, but you never feel done. Even spiritual practice can be shaped by craving. You want to be awakened, you want to be calm, you want to be better than before. And so you sit, you breathe, you listen, but underneath it all, craving still drives. You're not resting in awareness, you're chasing a version of peace. But peace can't be chased. It's what remains when craving fades. The Buddha didn't say craving is bad. He said it causes suffering because it creates friction. It turns the mind toward what isn't here. It contracts your experience. It creates resistance to what is and addiction to what could be. When you're not aware of it, it feels like your thoughts, your needs, your plans. But when you see it for what it is, it begins to lose its pull. This seeing is the beginning of release, not because you stop craving overnight, but because you stop mistaking it for truth. You learn to sit with the hunger without feeding it. You notice the impulse to fix, to reach, to improve, and instead of obeying, you pause. You say, "This is craving, it's here, it's not me," and you wait. You let the wave pass without riding it. Each time you do this, the nervous system learns something new. That urgency can exist without being followed. That rest is not the reward for achievement, it's available now. That joy isn't in the next thing, it's possible here. You begin to reclaim your energy not by retreating from life, but by refusing to chase what was never meant to be caught. Craving makes everything conditional. You're okay if things go well. You're at peace if emotions behave. You're grounded if the schedule works. But life doesn't follow those terms. And when craving drives your balance, balance will always be fragile. But when presence replaces craving, balance becomes durable. You can hold joy without fear. You can hold pain without collapse. You can meet change with softness. Craving also narrows your view. It makes you miss what's already working, what's already good, what's already here. You crave calm and overlook the silence between your thoughts. You crave connection and miss the warmth in your own breath. You crave freedom and ignore the fact that in this moment, you're not being chased. There's a kind of exhaustion that craving creates not just in the body, but in the heart. You stop trusting stillness. You stop believing peace is enough. You always want more, and that more becomes the prison. Even when you're surrounded by everything you said you wanted, craving whispers, "This isn't it." Letting go of craving is not about detachment. It's about intimacy. You stop leaning forward. You sit with what's here. You breathe with it. You touch life directly. No waiting, no performing, no becoming, just being. And slowly, that shift changes everything. You feel rest without needing it to solve you. You work without needing it to complete you. You care without needing it to fix you. You stop using life as a means to an end. You let it be life. This doesn't mean you lose motivation. It means your motivation comes from clarity, not hunger. You don't act to become, you act because presence moves you. You don't chase results, you align with truth. And the energy that used to get lost in craving becomes available for creativity, for compassion, for joy that isn't tied to outcome. The path out of burnout is not in resisting craving with force, but in seeing it with tenderness. You notice the pull, the wanting, the urge. You soften, you stay. You say, "I don't need to chase this." And in that pause, you find the thing craving was trying to buy you: freedom. Once you begin to see how craving keeps you endlessly reaching, never quite here, never quite full, you also start to see how fragile all of it is. The goals, the roles, the things you thought mattered so much. The mind softens when it realizes chasing won't lead to lasting peace. But what really changes you is the moment you realize how temporary this whole life is, not as a poetic idea, but as an undeniable truth. That everything you're clinging to, everything you're avoiding, everything you're using to define your worth will one day fall away. And when that truth lands, something sharp cuts through the fog, the knowledge that time is limited. And this is the doorway to Maranasati. Death contemplation is not morbid, it's not pessimism, it's clarity. It is the Buddhist practice of remembering that death is not a distant event, it's a fact that shapes every single day. And when burnout is caused by things that don't matter but still demand your energy, this practice has the power to change everything. Because death makes things simple. It strips away what's not essential. It makes it impossible to keep pretending that meaningless obligations are worth your soul. Maranasati brings your life into focus by asking the question no one wants to ask. If today were your last day, would this matter? Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, precise way that truth moves through the body. It turns distraction into attention. It transforms routine into intention. And most importantly, it exposes the things you're still doing just to be liked, just to fit in, just to avoid discomfort. When burnout hits, it often reveals a life filled with obligations that no longer serve you. But because those obligations are wrapped in identity, duty, habit, or fear, you keep doing them. You say yes when you mean no. You keep working beyond your limits. You prioritize what drains you. And somewhere inside, you know this isn't sustainable, but you keep going. Until death enters the room not as fear, but as truth, and everything false loses its hold. This is the gift of Maranasati, not fear of dying, but courage to live clearly. You sit with the reality that this breath could be your last, that this conversation might be the final one, that this day is not guaranteed another, and from that truth, clarity rises. You ask what actually matters. You look at your calendar, your relationships, your tasks, your worries, and see what falls away in the face of impermanence. When you realize that you will die, and you don't know when, suddenly the meeting you were stressed about doesn't feel as urgent. The inbox full of unread emails stops defining your worth. The social pressure to be everything to everyone starts to feel like noise. And what remains are the real things: being honest, loving well, caring for your body, creating meaning, resting without guilt. Burnout often comes from giving your life away to things that don't love you back. You trade your time for validation, your energy for status, your presence for productivity, but none of it will be on your mind when your time comes. What will matter then is whether you were kind, whether you lived honestly, whether you allowed yourself to be fully here, even for a moment. Maranasati doesn't numb you to death, it wakes you up to life. It removes the illusion of forever. It dissolves the fantasy of waiting until later to start caring for yourself. Later is not promised. And the things you keep postponing, rest, truth, change, are not luxuries. They're essential. Sitting with the contemplation of death also helps you face fear, not just fear of dying, but fear of being misunderstood, of being seen as weak, of disappointing others. These fears often keep you locked in a cycle of overdoing. But when you bring death into view, you stop giving fear so much power. You realize it's not scary to rest. It's not shameful to say no. What's truly tragic is spending a lifetime pleasing people who won't be there in your final moments. This practice also helps you sort through your priorities, not by writing another list, but by feeling into the truth of what matters. You begin to notice which conversations feel nourishing and which feel performative, which tasks feed your values and which feed your ego, which habits come from alignment and which come from fear. Death makes everything transparent, and in that transparency, you reclaim your right to choose. When you meditate on death, you're not obsessing over endings. You're remembering to stop sleepwalking. You're letting life be real again. You're giving yourself permission to drop the mask, to leave the path that's burning you out, to step into something that reflects what actually matters to your heart. Burnout begins to lift when you stop letting small things steal your days, when you stop offering your attention to things you wouldn't miss if tomorrow never came. Maranasati teaches you to ask, is this task, this role, this pressure worth the time I have left? And when the answer is no, you stop. Not dramatically, not violently, just clearly. This clarity allows you to grieve, too. Because when you start letting go of the unnecessary, there is loss. You grieve the version of yourself that tried so hard to keep up. You grieve the time you spent on things that didn't fulfill you. You grieve the years you were too scared to live honestly. But grief isn't weakness, it's part of the cleansing. It opens space for truth to take root. Death contemplation also brings compassion. When you remember that everyone around you is also dying slowly, invisibly, inevitably, you stop reacting so harshly. You stop holding grudges. You stop expecting perfection. You meet others with tenderness because you know time is short. You soften, not because you've given up, but because the fight no longer feels necessary. You begin to organize your life differently. You look at your obligations through the lens of finality. You keep what aligns. You release what drains. You no longer justify your choices with should. You live from want to, need to, and true to me. Not in selfishness, but in honesty. You realize your energy is sacred and time is the container that holds it. When the container is limited, you stop spilling. Burnout also heals through gratitude. When death is not denied, life becomes precious. You stop rushing through moments. You pause to taste, to feel, to hold. You speak more slowly. You listen more deeply. You rest more fully. You stop trying to stretch time. You start honoring it. This is the paradox of Maranasati. Remembering death brings more life. You begin to protect your attention. You say no with confidence. You walk away with peace. You love with presence. You work with care. You rest without guilt, because you know what's at stake. You're no longer guessing. You're no longer waiting. You're here. So the next time you feel pulled back into the cycle, back into burnout, pressure, overextension, pause. Ask yourself what will matter at the end. Ask yourself who you want to be when time runs out. Not in fear, but in clarity, in peace, in truth. Let death guide you back to life. When death becomes real in your awareness, life becomes impossible to waste. You no longer chase distractions. You stop tolerating what drains you. You begin to choose with care. But even then, in the wake of all that clarity, the habit of movement can still linger. You've stopped running from yourself, but the nervous system hasn't caught up. It's still wired to reach, to plan, to do. Even in stillness, there can be tension. Even in rest, your thoughts may sprint. This is the residue of a life lived in motion. And the next step is learning how to stop, not just physically, but entirely. To drop into a kind of presence that doesn't chase or perform. To return to being without doing. This is where Zazen begins. Zazen is the Zen practice of just sitting, not meditating with a goal, not solving anything, not reaching for bliss or answers or control, just sitting in complete stillness, not as a technique, but as a way of meeting life directly, without filters, without tasks, without needing to improve it. It's where the nervous system learns what it forgot. That stillness is safe. That presence is enough. That being doesn't need to justify itself through constant action. In burnout, even moments of rest can feel contaminated by pressure. You may sit down, but the mind continues. It rehearses, plans, rewrites, evaluates. Your body might be still, but your attention remains busy. Zazen interrupts this loop by removing all agendas. You don't sit to become calm. You sit because there is nowhere else to go. You meet the moment as it is, with no need to shape it. This kind of stillness is not about emptiness. It's about honesty. Zazen doesn't silence the mind by force. It allows you to see the mind's habits without reacting to them. You watch as thoughts come and go, memories, fears, cravings, judgments. And instead of following them, you stay. You don't resist. You don't cling. You don't fix. The sitting becomes a mirror. Everything arises. Everything falls away. And through this, the system begins to settle, not because you controlled it, but because you stopped feeding it. Hyperproductivity teaches your body that value comes from usefulness, that time must be filled, that rest must be earned. Zazen undoes this lie. In the silence of sitting, you learn that your existence is not defined by what you produce. You are not a machine. You don't need to generate outcomes to justify your breath. You sit, and the world continues. The breath continues. Awareness continues. And none of it requires your effort. This unlearning takes time. At first, doing nothing can feel unbearable. The body fidgets. The mind searches for purpose. You want to get up, check something, improve something. But if you stay, something deeper is revealed. You begin to feel the pressure you've been living under, not as an idea, but as physical tension, as subtle contraction in the chest, as buzzing under the skin. Zazen helps you feel this clearly, not to change it, but to allow it, to sit in the middle of it and stop resisting. Doing this regularly trains the nervous system to relax without needing external cues. You stop needing background noise to feel okay. You stop reaching for stimulation. You stop demanding constant mental motion. The body learns to breathe without urgency. The mind learns to rest without reward. Over time, this creates a different kind of energy. Not the spike of adrenaline, but the steady flow of presence. Zazen also teaches you how to relate to discomfort. Instead of avoiding it, you meet it. You sit through the itch, the boredom, the racing thought. You notice that everything uncomfortable has a peak and then it passes. You realize you don't need to fix discomfort for it to change. You don't need to fight tension for it to release. By simply witnessing, you create space. And that space is where the healing happens. The practice also reveals how much of your stress is tied to identity. In sitting with nothing to do and no role to perform, you may feel the loss of definition. Who are you without your work? Without your schedule? Without your goals? These questions surface in silence, but they aren't problems to solve. They are doors to walk through. You discover that identity is not what holds you, it's what exhausts you. And when it falls away, you're not left with nothing, you're left with truth. Truth is not always comfortable, but it is always freeing. In the clarity of Zazen, you start to notice the difference between mental noise and actual needs. You no longer confuse urgency with importance. You don't respond to every thought as if it matters. You stop organizing your life around reaction. This creates space for intention. You don't move because you're pushed. You move when it's time. Zazen also changes your relationship with time. When you're always doing, time feels scarce. There's never enough. But in stillness, time expands. A minute can feel full. A breath can feel complete. You stop measuring life by how much you accomplish. You start measuring it by how fully you're here. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you deliberate, focused, awake. This practice doesn't need special conditions. You don't need a retreat. You need a cushion, a chair, a quiet space, and a willingness to meet what's real. You sit upright, alert, grounded. Eyes open or gently closed, hands resting, breath steady, and you just sit. When thoughts arise, you let them go. When sensations come, you let them pass. You don't try to stop anything. You just stop doing. Even 10 minutes a day can begin to shift your rhythm. Not because it solves everything, but because it interrupts the pattern. It gives the nervous system something new, space. In that space, you begin to trust stillness. You begin to feel whole without explanation. And slowly, that becomes your baseline, not productivity, not pressure, not performance, but being. This kind of being doesn't exclude action. It informs it. After sitting, you return to life with more clarity. You speak with less reactivity. You work with more attention. You rest without guilt. Because you're no longer acting to become, you're acting from presence. In a world addicted to speed, Zazen is resistance. In a culture obsessed with doing, it is a return to being, not as escape, but as truth. You are not here to keep up. You are not here to burn out. You are here to be awake, to be present, to be alive. Let yourself stop. Let yourself sit. Let yourself remember who you are without effort. As the practice of just sitting takes root, you begin to notice a profound shift not just in your energy, but in your relationship with effort itself. You're no longer chasing rest through productivity or trying to earn your worth through constant doing. You've felt what it's like to drop the struggle, to let the nervous system find stillness without reward. But the world still pulls. It tells you to either go all in or step completely out, to grind endlessly or abandon everything, to fix it all or give up entirely. This tension is everywhere, especially inside. And if you're healing from burnout, these extremes don't just slow your progress, they keep you stuck. This is where the middle way enters, not as a compromise, but as wisdom, a path of balance that cuts through the noise of all or nothing thinking. It doesn't ask you to give up your goals, nor does it tell you to suppress your needs. It simply asks you to stop swinging between the poles of overdrive and collapse, between perfectionism and avoidance, between burnout and withdrawal. All or nothing living is a cycle that feels normal when you're in it. You push too hard for too long, then crash. You overcommit out of guilt, then isolate from exhaustion. You set rigid routines to regain control, then abandon them at the first sign of failure. And with each swing, your nervous system becomes more dysregulated, your self-trust weakens, your clarity fades. You stop knowing what enough feels like. The middle way, taught by the Buddha after years of extreme asceticism followed by indulgence, is not a middle point on a graph, it's a living principle. It means seeing clearly what helps and what harms, what sustains and what depletes. It invites you to hold both discipline and rest without letting either become your identity. You learn to listen to your needs without swinging into indulgence. You show up for your life without disappearing into performance. In practical terms, this begins with how you structure your day. You stop designing schedules that demand perfection. You stop expecting every day to look the same. You create routines that support you, but leave room for change. You let yourself rest when you're tired, not only when you've earned it. You give effort where it's useful, and you stop when the cost becomes too high. Emotionally, the middle way helps you move through intensity without losing your center. You learn not to dramatize every dip in mood or over-identify with temporary states. When sadness comes, you let it stay without making it your whole story. When energy rises, you enjoy it without attaching your identity to productivity. This balanced approach makes your inner life more stable, more breathable. You stop fearing your own emotions. You stop needing them to be one way or another. In your career, the middle way asks you to examine how your work fits your life, not just how your life fits your work. You don't have to quit everything to heal, but you also don't have to accept constant pressure as normal. You ask what's negotiable, what can soften, what can be delayed. You no longer treat exhaustion as proof of dedication. You begin to work from presence instead of pressure. This mindset also helps you break free from spiritual extremes. You stop thinking that peace comes only after hours of practice, or that missing a day means failure. You recognize that transformation happens in the small, consistent choices. You don't need to retreat into silence forever, nor do you need to consume every teaching available. You find a rhythm that is both disciplined and forgiving. You trust that every breath counts, even the imperfect ones. One of the deepest shifts the middle way offers is in how you relate to success and failure. All or nothing thinking says you must get it right or not try at all, that you must be the best or you're nothing. This creates fear around effort, shame around rest, but the middle way breaks that illusion. It tells you that progress includes pauses, that growth includes missteps, that healing is not a straight line, but a rhythm of rise and fall. You start to set goals differently, not as ultimatums, but as intentions. You leave space for flexibility. You notice when your expectations are based on fantasy instead of capacity. You allow yourself to want things without grasping. You take action without making it a condition for self-acceptance. Relationships also transform through this lens. You stop expecting others to meet all your needs. You stop offering more than you have to give. You begin to speak more honestly. Set clearer boundaries. Apologize without self-attack. Forgive without abandoning your truth. Balance shows up in your tone, your presence, your ability to hold space without collapsing into it. The middle way also changes how you think about rest. You no longer confuse it with laziness. You see it as part of your rhythm. You stop waiting to earn it. You integrate it into your life before crisis forces you. You let rest be proactive, not reactive. You learn to rest even when things are unfinished, even when there's more to do, because there always will be. and your worth is not tied to checking every box. One of the most healing parts of this path is learning to feel good without guilt. You let joy exist without fearing it will be taken. You allow ease without expecting collapse to follow. You stop sabotaging peace because it feels unfamiliar. Balance becomes your new normal. And with it, a deeper kind of energy returns, not the spike of adrenaline, but the quiet strength of alignment. Burnout recovery is not just about stepping away, it's about stepping into a different way of being. The middle way offers this not as a temporary fix, but as a path forward. One where extremes no longer define you, where you can trust yourself to navigate life without breaking in half, where effort and rest walk side by side, where clarity replaces confusion, and where presence, not perfection, becomes the goal. This way is gentle, but it's not weak. It requires awareness, choice, patience, but it gives something back that extremes never can: stability, not in the world, but in yourself. You've walked through something most people never stop long enough to face. Not just burnout, but the roots beneath it. The craving, the overgiving, the identities that drain you. You've seen how the quiet power of Buddhist wisdom doesn't just soothe your exhaustion, it reshapes your entire relationship with effort, stillness, and self. From the 5 hindrances to the 8 worldly winds. From noble silence to the rhythm of monastic life. From death contemplation to the middle way. Every teaching has pointed to the same quiet truth. You were never meant to burn out just to feel worthy. You were meant to live aligned, present, whole. Burnout doesn't end by doing more. It ends when you return to what you've always had: this breath, this body, this moment. Nothing to prove, nowhere to get. Just being. And in that being, something sacred returns. Energy, clarity, and peace that doesn't depend on anything outside of you. If any part of this resonated, if something softened inside you tonight, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and share. Which teaching will you carry with you tomorrow? Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read. And if you'd like to keep walking this path slowly, wisely, and together, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's more to explore, more to release, more to remember. This is just the beginning. Rest well. You've already done enough.